The birth of the Ultramarines began not amid the pristine marble halls of Crag, but in the devastated wastelands of ancient Terra during the final years of the Unification Wars. As the Emperor's grand vision for humanity's future took shape, he initiated the creation of 20 genetically engineered transhuman armies that would serve as the vanguard of his great crusade to reclaim the scattered human worlds across the galaxy. The 13th Legion, not yet bearing the name Ultramarines, was among these first founding legions. Their initial recruitment stock came primarily from the regions of Old Nordic and Ursh, areas known for their disciplined and taciturn warrior cultures. These first aspirants underwent the dangerous and painful process of gene seed implantation in the laboratories beneath the Himalaysian mountains, where the Emperor's Jinrites labored to perfect the transformation from mortal to Astartes. Unlike some of their more volatile brother legions, the warriors of the 13th displayed a remarkable adaptability and pragmatism from their earliest deployments. The legion's initial gene tithe showed an unusually high compatibility with their Primarch's genetic material, enabling them to expand steadily in number, unlike some of their less fortunate counterparts. The Emperor's chief geneticist, Amr Astarte, noted the legion's genetic stability in her early reports, marking them as one of the more successful implementations of the Astartes project. During the final phases of Terra's unification, the 13th Legion earned distinction in several notable campaigns, including the pacification of the Caucasus Wastes and the Pan-Pacific Empire. Their approach to warfare already displayed the hallmarks that would later become codified doctrine, methodical planning, coordinated combined arms assaults, and adaptable battlefield tactics. Yet without their Primarch's guidance, they lacked the distinctive cultural identity that would later define them. When the Emperor launched his great crusade to reunite humanity, the 13th Legion departed Terra alongside their creator, serving as part of the initial expeditionary fleets. For nearly 3 decades, they fought under the Emperor's direct command, expanding the boundaries of what would become the Imperium of Man. Though effective, they remained somewhat unremarkable compared to legions like the Luna Wolves or the Dark Angels, who had already found their Primarchs and developed distinctive martial cultures. The Legion's destiny changed dramatically in the 30th millennium when their Primarch was discovered on the feudal world of Crag in the Eastern Fringe. Roboute Guilliman's story began decades earlier during the Primarch project, when the 20 genetically engineered superhuman sons of the Emperor were scattered across the galaxy by unknown forces, likely the machinations of the Chaos Gods. Guilliman's gestation pod came to rest on Crag, a mountainous world with a culture reminiscent of ancient Rome and Greece. The infant Primarch was discovered by a patrol led by Connor Guilliman, one of the 2 consuls who ruled Crag City, the largest population center on the planet. Connor adopted the child as his son, naming him Roboute. Even as a youth, Guilliman displayed extraordinary intellect and physical capabilities far beyond those of normal humans. By age 10, he had mastered everything the scholars of Crag could teach him regarding history, philosophy, and the arts of war. His adoptive father groomed him for leadership, instilling values of civic duty, logical thinking, and pragmatic governance. Crag at this time was divided between the civilized southern regions and the barbaric northern highlands. When Guilliman reached adulthood, he led military campaigns to pacify the northern tribes, displaying not only martial prowess, but also administrative genius. Rather than merely conquering these regions, he incorporated them into Crag's growing civilization, building infrastructure and establishing educational systems to elevate the conquered peoples. This pattern of conquest, followed by integration and improvement, would become the template for the Ultramarines' approach to imperial compliance during the Great Crusade. Guilliman believed that victory meant little if it did not lead to lasting improvement in the human condition, a philosophy that would eventually be codified in his greatest work, the Codex Astartes. Tragedy struck when Connor was assassinated during a coup orchestrated by the other consul, Galen. Guilliman's response was swift and terrible. He crushed the rebellion, personally slaying the traitors responsible for his father's death. In the aftermath, the people of Crag City unanimously acclaimed him as their sole consul. Within a year, he had united the entire planet under his rule. Over the next several years, Guilliman expanded Macragge's influence throughout the surrounding star systems, creating a small but efficient interstellar empire known as the Realm of Ultramar. He established a meritocratic system of governance, where ability and character determined advancement rather than birth or wealth. This system produced administrators and military leaders of exceptional quality, creating a stable and prosperous society that would serve as the foundation for the Ultramarines Legion's recruitment. The Emperor's Great Crusade finally reached Macragge approximately 5 decades after the Primarch's arrival. Recognizing his son immediately, the Emperor welcomed Guilliman into the Imperial fold and granted him command of the 13th Legion, which had been created from his genetic template. The Legion, numbering around 8,000 Astartes at this time, knelt before their Gene Father upon the fields of Kor outside Macragge City. Guilliman spent several months studying the organization, tactics, and culture of his legion before implementing sweeping reforms. He renamed them the Ultramarines, drawing from an ancient Macragge term meaning beyond the sea, symbolizing their role as travelers from beyond the stars who brought civilization and order. Their armor was repainted the deep blue of Macragge's oceans, adorned with gold trim representing excellence and achievement. The Primarch restructured the Legion along more efficient lines, creating a clear chain of command and specialized detachments that could operate independently yet combine seamlessly when needed. He established training protocols that emphasized versatility, tactical awareness, and initiative at all levels of command. Most importantly, he began the practice of extensive documentation and analysis of combat operations, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become the Codex Astartes. With his legion reformed and the realm of Ultramar incorporated into the Imperium, Guilliman launched his contribution to the Great Crusade with characteristic thoroughness. The Ultramarines' first major campaign under their Primarch's leadership was the compliance of the Atrax system, where they demonstrated their new organizational efficiency by bringing 5 human-inhabited worlds into compliance in less than a year, with minimal casualties on either side. This pattern continued as the Ultramarines expanded outward from Ultramar. Unlike some legions that specialized in particular types of warfare, Guilliman trained his sons to excel in all combat environments and against all enemy types. They became masters of void warfare, planetary assault, urban combat, and wilderness campaigns. The Primarch personally led many of these operations, constantly refining his legion's tactics based on battlefield experience. The Ultramarines' efficiency in bringing worlds into compliance allowed them to expand their recruitment base far beyond most other legions. While some Primarchs restricted recruitment to their homeworlds or a handful of planets, Guilliman established Astartes training facilities on dozens of worlds across Ultramar and beyond. Each of these facilities implemented standardized selection and training protocols developed by the Primarch himself, ensuring consistent quality despite the diverse origins of the recruits. This approach, combined with the genetic stability of the Ultramarines' gene seed, enabled the Legion to grow at an unprecedented rate. By the time of the triumph at Ultramar, which marked the high point of the Great Crusade, the Ultramarines numbered approximately 250,000 battle brothers, making them by far the largest of the Space Marine legions. Some historical accounts suggest they may have grown even larger in the years that followed, potentially reaching strengths of up to 300,000 Astartes before the Horus Heresy erupted. The rapid growth of the Legion necessitated further organizational innovations. Guilliman divided his vast forces into chapters, each numbering roughly 10,000 warriors and capable of operating as an independent crusade force. These chapters were further subdivided into companies, battalions, and squads, creating a flexible command structure that could adapt to any strategic situation. This chapter-based organization would later serve as the template for the post-heresy reformation of the Adeptus Astartes. Beyond mere size and organizational efficiency, what truly distinguished the Ultramarines was their culture. Guilliman instilled in his sons the values he had learned on Macragge: duty, honor, courage tempered by wisdom, and above all, the concept of practical idealism. The Ultramarines fought not merely to conquer but to improve, to bring the light of imperial truth to the darkness of the galaxy, and raise humanity to its highest potential. This cultural foundation expressed itself in how the Ultramarines conducted compliance operations. Where possible, they preferred diplomatic solutions, demonstrating the benefits of imperial rule rather than simply imposing it through force. When combat became necessary, they employed overwhelming but precisely targeted force, minimizing civilian casualties and infrastructure damage. After victory, they assisted in establishing effective governance structures before moving on to their next objective. The Primarch's influence extended beyond military matters into all aspects of his legion's identity. He established traditions of scholarly pursuit, encouraging his officers to study history, philosophy, and the arts during their limited leisure time. He instituted a system of honors and recognitions based on merit rather than favoritism or battlefield glory alone. Most distinctively, he fostered a culture of critical self-assessment, where even successful operations were analyzed for potential improvements. Not all within the Imperium viewed the Ultramarines' rapid growth and cultural distinctiveness with approval. Some of Guilliman's brother Primarchs, particularly Alfarius of the Alpha Legion and Lorgar of the Word Bearers, criticized what they perceived as arrogance and inflexibility. The War Master Horus himself reportedly remarked that while the Ultramarines were exemplary soldiers, they lacked the creative adaptability that defined legions like his own Luna Wolves. These criticisms, however, did little to diminish the Ultramarines' accomplishments during the Great Crusade. Historical records attribute over 100,000 successful compliance actions to Guilliman's legion, more than any other. The worlds they brought into the Imperium typically showed higher rates of stability and prosperity than the imperial average, requiring less ongoing military presence to maintain order. As the Great Crusade progressed, the realm of Ultramar itself became a showcase of imperial potential. Spanning 500 worlds by some accounts, Ultramar developed into a remarkably self-sufficient domain with efficient trade networks, standardized education systems, and technological development that approached Golden Age levels in some sectors. Visitors from Terra and other core worlds often expressed surprise at finding such advanced civilization in what had once been considered the galactic backwater of the Eastern Fringe. Throughout this period of expansion and achievement, Guilliman maintained close relationships with several of his brother Primarchs, particularly Sanguinius of the Blood Angels and Rogel Dorn of the Imperial Fists. He also served as a trusted advisor to the Emperor, who valued the Ultramarines' Primarch's administrative genius and strategic insight. When the Emperor returned to Terra to work on his secret webway project, leaving Horus as War Master to oversee the Crusade, Guilliman accepted the new command structure with characteristic pragmatism, though historical records suggest he harbored private concerns about the wisdom of the Emperor's withdrawal. As the Ultramarines' legion grew under Guilliman's guidance, so too did the realm from which they drew their strength. Ultramar stood as a testament to what humanity could achieve under enlightened leadership, a stark contrast to many other regions of the nascent Imperium, where compliance often meant little more than replacing local tyrants with imperial governors. The origins of Ultramar as an interstellar domain predated the Emperor's arrival by several decades. After unifying Macragge, Guilliman turned his gaze to the stars, methodically expanding his influence to neighboring systems. Unlike many warlords of the Age of Strife, he did not seek conquest merely for its own sake. Each world brought into Macragge's fold was systematically improved, its infrastructure rebuilt, its society reorganized along rational lines. By the time the Emperor reached the Eastern Fringe, Guilliman had established authority over 8 star systems, comprising roughly 24 inhabited worlds. This proto-Ultramar already displayed the hallmarks that would define the realm at its height: meritocratic governance, standardized legal codes, efficient resource distribution, and a shared cultural identity that transcended planetary boundaries. The incorporation of this domain into the Imperium marked not an end, but an acceleration of its development. With access to imperial technology and the organizational genius of a Primarch operating on an interstellar scale, Ultramar expanded at an unprecedented rate. Within 50 years of Guilliman taking command of his legion, the realm had grown to encompass over 500 worlds spread across approximately 100 star systems. This expansion was not achieved through military conquest alone. Guilliman employed a sophisticated approach that combined diplomatic outreach, economic incentives, cultural exchange, and only when necessary, the overwhelming might of his Ultramarines. Many human-inhabited worlds voluntarily joined Ultramar after witnessing the prosperity it brought to their neighbors. Others, ruled by entrenched autocracies or Xenos overlords, required more forceful persuasion. The administrative structure Guilliman established to govern this vast realm became a model studied by imperial administrators across the galaxy. At its foundation lay the concept of the Tetrarchy, a division of Ultramar into 4 quadrants, each overseen by a high officer of the Ultramarines who held the title of Tetrarch. These individuals were selected not merely for their martial prowess, but for their administrative acumen and character. Each was granted considerable autonomy within their quadrant while remaining ultimately answerable to Guilliman himself. The first Tetrarchs, Icos Lamiad, Toro Nicodemus, Sazan Hieronima, and Bastion Defay, were among Guilliman's most trusted lieutenants. They established their seats of power on key worlds that served as sub-capitals for their respective quadrants: Saramanth, Connor, Occluda, and Iax. From these centers, they coordinated the activities of planetary governors, managed resource allocation, oversaw defense forces, and implemented the Primarch's directives. Below the Tetrarchs in authority were the planetary governors, typically drawn from local nobility or meritocratic bureaucracies rather than imposed from outside. Guilliman believed that effective governance required intimate knowledge of local conditions, something off-world appointees often lacked. These governors were evaluated based on measurable outcomes, economic productivity, public health metrics, education levels, and social stability, rather than personal loyalty or tribute payments. This approach stood in marked contrast to the practices emerging in other parts of the expanding Imperium, where governorship was increasingly treated as a reward for political allies or successful military commanders. While the Emperor's representatives, particularly Malcador the Sigillite, recognized the effectiveness of Guilliman's system, they made little effort to implement it elsewhere, considering Ultramar an exception rather than a model. At the heart of Ultramar lay Macragge, the throne world of Guilliman and headquarters of the Ultramarines Legion. The planet's geography featured dramatic mountain ranges interspersed with fertile valleys and vast oceans. Its 2 largest population centers, Macragge Civitas in the southern hemisphere and Magna Macragge Civitas in the north, exemplified the architectural and urban planning principles Guilliman favored. Grid-patterned streets, monumental civic buildings constructed from native blue vein marble, extensive public spaces, and efficient transportation networks. The Fortress of Hera, seat of Ultramarines' power, dominated the northern city from its position atop Mount Hera. This massive complex combined military functionality with aesthetic grandeur, housing training facilities, armories, command centers, and the Great Hall of Columns where Guilliman held court. The fortress was designed not merely as a defensive structure, but as a symbol of the Ultramarines' role as guardians and leaders of Ultramar. Second in importance only to Macragge was Calth, a world of underground cities and vast agricultural caverns illuminated by artificial light. The planet's surface, bathed in intense ultraviolet radiation from its sun, remained largely uninhabitable, though specially adapted crops were cultivated in shielded facilities. Calth's strategic value derived from its position at a key navigational nexus, controlling warp routes that connected Ultramar to the wider Imperium. The Calth shipyards, constructed in orbit around the planet, produced vessels for both the Ultramarines' fleet and Ultramar's merchant marine. These facilities employed millions of workers and represented one of the largest industrial concentrations in the Eastern Fringe. The world also housed extensive training grounds where Ultramarines recruits underwent their final trials before full induction into the Legion. Connor, seat of Tetrarch Toro Nicodemus, served as Ultramar's industrial powerhouse. Its surface was dominated by manufactoria complexes and processing facilities that converted raw materials from throughout the realm into finished goods. Despite this industrial focus, Guilliman insisted on maintaining environmental standards that prevented the wholesale pollution common to many Imperial Forge worlds. Vast reclamation systems captured and recycled industrial byproducts, while worker habitation zones featured parks and public amenities rarely seen in comparable facilities elsewhere. The agricultural world of Ix presented a stark contrast to Connor's industrialized landscape. Known as the Garden of Ultramar, Ix boasted carefully managed ecosystems that produced food sufficient to supply dozens of neighboring systems. Tetrarch Bastion de Fae governed from the Hanging Gardens of Ix, a marvel of bioengineering where administrative complexes were integrated with cultivated wilderness. The planet served as both breadbasket and retreat, with estates where Ultramarines officers could recover from the psychological rigors of warfare amid natural beauty. Other notable worlds included Parmenio, Center for Legion Recruitment and Initial Training, Espandor, known for its universities and research facilities, Quintarn, whose vast plains supported massive herds of livestock, and Talisar, an ocean world whose inhabitants provided many of the Void sailors who crewed Ultramar's merchant fleet. The prosperity of these worlds derived not merely from their natural resources, but from the systematic way Guilliman integrated them into a cohesive economic whole. Each planet was encouraged to develop specialized industries suited to its environment and population, while remaining part of an interdependent network. Raw materials flowed from mining worlds to manufacturing centers, finished goods were distributed according to need and merit, and information was shared through standardized communication protocols. This economic integration was facilitated by a transportation infrastructure unrivaled outside the core Imperial worlds. The Ultramar Auxilia maintained and protected shipping lanes between major systems, while standardized void port facilities reduced delays in cargo transfers. Navigational beacons, positioned at strategic points throughout the realm, made warp travel more predictable and safer than in many other regions of space. Education formed another pillar of Ultramar's success. Guilliman established a tiered system of schools accessible to all citizens regardless of birth or wealth. Primary education focused on practical skills and civic values, while secondary academies identified those with aptitude for specialized roles. The highest tier, the Praetoriums, trained future leaders in administration, military strategy, engineering, and other disciplines critical to maintaining the realm. This educational system served multiple purposes beyond the obvious benefit of a skilled population. It identified potential Ultramarines recruits from across the realm rather than limiting selection to a single world. It created a common cultural framework that transcended planetary differences, fostering a shared Ultramarine identity. Perhaps most importantly, it produced the administrators who implemented Guilliman's vision on a daily basis across hundreds of worlds. The Primarch's governance philosophy was codified in several works that became foundational texts throughout Ultramar. The Principia Civitas outlined his theories of civil administration, emphasizing evidence-based decision-making, meritocratic advancement, and the balance between individual liberty and collective welfare. Reflections Dearness, a collection of Guilliman's personal observations on leadership, was required reading for all who held positions of authority. Most influential was Imperium Secundus, which articulated his vision of how human civilization might be organized on an interstellar scale. These works revealed a mind concerned with practical idealism, the implementation of noble principles through pragmatic means. Guilliman rejected both unfettered individualism and totalitarian control, seeking instead a middle path where citizens enjoyed personal freedoms within a framework of mutual obligation. He viewed government not as an end in itself, but as a tool for improving the human condition, and he judged its success by measurable outcomes rather than ideological purity. This approach extended to religious matters as well. While Guilliman implemented the imperial truth throughout Ultramar, prohibiting superstitious worship and promoting rational inquiry, he did so with characteristic methodical care. Rather than simply suppressing local beliefs, he established educational programs that offered scientific explanations for natural phenomena previously attributed to supernatural forces. Traditional festivals and customs were gradually transformed into secular celebrations of Ultramarine identity, preserving cultural continuity while redirecting devotional impulses toward civic virtue. The military defense of this thriving realm rested primarily with the Ultramarines Legion, but they were supplemented by several additional forces. The Ultramar Auxilia, composed of mortal soldiers trained to Legion-derived standards, garrisoned key worlds, and maintained internal security. The Ultramar Defense Fleet protected shipping lanes and served as a first line of defense against external threats. On each world, planetary defense forces trained regularly with both Auxilia and Ultramarines units, creating an integrated defense network that could respond rapidly to any incursion. This military infrastructure proved its worth during the Carthage Compliance, when an Orc-Wa penetrated the eastern boundaries of Ultramar in the late 30th millennium. Guilliman, campaigning with the main Legion forces in the galactic north, was unable to return immediately. The Tetrarchs, implementing contingency plans developed years earlier, coordinated a defensive action that contained the Orc advance until the Primarch could arrive with reinforcements. The incident validated Guilliman's emphasis on distributed authority and standardized response protocols. Beyond its military and economic achievements, Ultramar distinguished itself through its approach to human welfare. Public health systems ensured that basic medical care was available to all citizens, while sanitation infrastructure and clean water supplies reduced disease vectors common on many Imperial worlds. Labor laws prevented the worst exploitative practices seen elsewhere, establishing standard working hours, safety requirements, and minimum compensation levels. While far from utopian by modern standards, these measures created living conditions that most Imperial citizens would have considered luxurious. The realm also pioneered integration protocols for newly compliant worlds. Rather than imposing an immediate cultural transformation, Guilliman's administrators identified local practices compatible with Imperial governance and used them as bridges to introduce new concepts. Local elites were offered education and positions within the Ultramarine system, rather than being summarily replaced. This approach reduced resistance and accelerated the assimilation process, allowing new acquisitions to become productive members of the realm within a single generation. Many of the governance principles tested and refined in Ultramar would later appear in the Codex Astartes, particularly in the sections dealing with space marine interaction with civilian authorities. Guilliman's experiences managing his realm directly informed his recommendations for how the post-heresy chapters should relate to the broader Imperium. The distinction between military and civil authority, the emphasis on protecting human populations rather than merely controlling them, and the concept of space marines as exemplars rather than rulers all derived from Ultramar's successful model. As the Great Crusade progressed and more of the galaxy came under Imperial control, Ultramar's reputation spread. Delegations from distant worlds traveled to Macragge to study its governance systems. Several of Guilliman's brother Primarchs, including Sanguinius and Vulcan, visited the realm and expressed admiration for its achievements. Even the Emperor himself reportedly commended the Primarch for creating what he described as an exemplar of humanity's potential when guided by reason and common purpose. The bonds of brotherhood that united the Primarchs and their legions had always been complex, fraught with rivalries and philosophical differences hidden beneath the veneer of unity. None understood this better than Roboute Guilliman, whose methodical approach to Imperial compliance often drew criticism from his more impulsive brothers. Yet even his analytical mind failed to anticipate the depth of hatred harbored by Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the Word-Bearers and architect of what would become the greatest betrayal in Ultramar's history. The seeds of this betrayal were planted decades before the Horus Heresy erupted, when the Emperor publicly humiliated Lorgar and his legion on the planet Monarchia. The city, considered the perfect embodiment of the Word-Bearer's devotion to the Emperor as a divine being, was reduced to ash by the Ultramarines, who had been ordered to serve as the Emperor's executioners. Though Guilliman had merely followed orders, Lorgar never forgave him for his role in this devastation. What the Ultramarines Primarch viewed as an unfortunate duty, Lorgar experienced as an unforgivable desecration. For years, Lorgar nursed this grievance while outwardly appearing to accept the Emperor's correction. In truth, he had turned to darker powers, embracing the entities of the warp that promised him vindication. By the time Horus declared his rebellion against the Emperor, Lorgar had already spent decades preparing the perfect revenge against both his father and the brother who had demolished his sacred city. This vengeance took form at Calth, a vital industrial and shipbuilding world in the Ultramar system. In the 31st millennium, as the Horus heresy began spreading across the galaxy, Guilliman remained unaware of the extent of the treachery unfolding. Initial reports of conflict were fragmented and contradictory, with astropathic communications increasingly disrupted by warp disturbances. When orders came from the Warmaster Horus to muster forces at Calth in preparation for a campaign against the Orcs in the Viridian system, Guilliman had no reason to suspect deception. The gathering at Calth was immense, with approximately 250,000 Ultramarines assembling alongside massive fleet elements, army auxilia, and mechanicum assets. Warsmith Barabbas Dantiok of the Iron Warriors, who had remained loyal to the Emperor despite his Primarch's treachery, attempted to warn Guilliman of impending danger, but his messages never reached Macragge due to warp interference deliberately engineered by the word-bearers. The word-bearers arrived at Calth with approximately 50,000 Astartes, ostensibly to join the muster against the Orcs. Their fleet, comprising around 100 vessels, took position among the Ultramarines' armada without raising suspicion. Lorgar himself did not accompany his legion, instead sending his most trusted lieutenants, Cor Ferron, first captain and spiritual advisor, and Erebus, first chaplain and master manipulator, to oversee the attack. The betrayal began without warning. Word-bearers' vessels opened fire on the unprepared Ultramarines' ships, while their troops already deployed to the surface activated hidden explosives in strategic locations. Orbital defense platforms, their command crews infiltrated by word-bearers' operatives, turned their weapons against Ultramarines' vessels. Within minutes, the void above Calth became a chaotic battlefield as loyalist ships struggled to respond to attacks coming from vessels they had considered allies. On the planet's surface, the situation was equally dire. Word-bearers' forces had positioned themselves throughout key infrastructure points, including the main spaceport at Numinus, the Mechanicum forges at Calca's Fortalice, and the Strategic Command Center at Arcology Epsilon. When the signal came, they struck with coordinated precision, killing thousands of Ultramarines before they could even draw their weapons. The initial assault devastated Guilliman's forces. Dozens of ships were destroyed in the opening salvos, including the battle barge Antradamicus, which had served as the Legion flagship during the early Great Crusade. On the ground, entire companies of Ultramarines were wiped out before they could organize an effective defense. The death toll in these first hours reached approximately 30,000 Astartes, more Ultramarines than existed in many other legions in their entirety. Captain Ventanus of the 4th Company found himself the highest-ranking officer in Numinus after his superiors were killed in a plasma reactor detonation. Taking command of the scattered Ultramarines forces in the area, he established a defensive perimeter around the city's administrative quarter and began coordinating counterattacks against word-bearers' positions. His quick thinking prevented the complete collapse of the loyalist forces in the southern hemisphere. In orbit, Chapter Master Marius Gage of the Ultramarines' first chapter managed to rally the surviving fleet elements despite the destruction of his flagship. Using short-range Vox communications to avoid the signal interference affecting longer-range systems, he coordinated a fighting retreat that preserved a significant portion of the Ultramarines' void assets. This preservation of fleet strength would prove crucial in the campaigns that followed. The greatest catastrophe came approximately 7 hours into the battle, when word-bearers' saboteurs detonated charges that breached Calth's subterranean defense systems. This allowed them to access the controls for the massive orbital defense batteries. Rather than continuing to target Ultramarines' vessels, they reoriented these weapons toward Calth's sun. The concentrated energy caused a massive solar flare that swept across the system, bombarding Calth with lethal radiation. The planet's surface, once home to productive agricultural regions and thriving cities, was instantly rendered uninhabitable. Millions of civilians died in the initial radiation wave, while millions more would perish in the following days as the radiation penetrated even shielded structures. the Ultramarines and their mortal allies were forced to retreat into the ancient tunnel networks beneath the surface, beginning what would become known as the Underworld War. This underground conflict represented a new kind of warfare for the Ultramarines, who had traditionally excelled in coordinated combined arms operations across open battlefields. The narrow tunnels and caverns beneath Calth's surface negated many of their tactical advantages, forcing small units to operate with minimal support and limited communication. Yet even in these dire circumstances, Guilliman's sons demonstrated their adaptability. Captain Ethan of the 19th Company, trapped with approximately 4,000 battle brothers in the eastern tunnel complexes, established the Aegis Protocol, a system of rotating defense positions that allowed his forces to hold a vast network of corridors against numerically superior word-bearers' assaults. In the western regions, Sergeant Anchise led a guerrilla campaign that tied down an entire word-bearers chapter for over 3 months, using his intimate knowledge of mining operations from his pre-Astartes life on Calth. The Underworld War was characterized by its brutality and the psychological toll it took on both sides. Fighting in perpetual darkness, often with limited ammunition and supplies, the combatants resorted to primitive weapons and hand-to-hand combat. Word-bearers' forces, increasingly embracing demonic assistance, conducted rituals that tainted large sections of the tunnel networks with warp energies. Ultramarines' troops encountered horrors previously unknown to them, possessed battle brothers, reality warping phenomena, and entities that defied rational explanation. Despite these challenges, the Ultramarines gradually gained the upper hand in the underground conflict. Their disciplined approach proved more effective for sustained operations than the increasingly chaotic word-bearers' tactics. By establishing secure zones and systematically clearing adjacent areas, they expanded their control of the tunnel networks while the word-bearers found their forces fragmented and isolated. While the battle for Calth raged beneath the surface, Guilliman himself was fighting for the survival of the broader Ultramar. The Primarch had been en route to Calth when the attack began, his vessel narrowly avoiding destruction by diverting to an emergency trajectory. Upon learning of the betrayal, he immediately recognized that Calth was merely one component of a larger assault on Ultramar. His suspicions proved correct. Across the 500 worlds, Word-bearers' forces had launched coordinated attacks against key systems. The Forge world of Connor faced a massive ground invasion. The shipyards at Quintarn burned as saboteurs detonated explosives throughout their structures. On Espandor, Word-bearers' troops massacred the population of entire cities in ritualistic sacrifices that opened warp portals, allowing demonic entities to manifest in real space. Guilliman's response demonstrated why he was considered the foremost strategist among the Primarchs. From his temporary command center on the agri-world of Barian, he analyzed the pattern of attacks and identified the primary thrust of the Word-bearers' offensive. Rather than attempting to defend every world simultaneously, an impossible task given the dispersal of his forces, he prioritized key strategic locations and implemented a fighting retreat where necessary. The Primarch's greatest challenge was not tactical but logistical. The Word-bearers had specifically targeted Ultramar's communication network, destroying astropathic relay stations and navigator houses on dozens of worlds. This communication blackout prevented Guilliman from coordinating his legion's response with the efficiency that had always been his hallmark. To overcome this limitation, he established a network of rapid response vessels, small, fast craft that carried written orders between systems, maintaining a semblance of unified command despite the communications breakdown. As the conflict spread across Ultramar, a new and more terrifying development emerged. In the void between Macragge and Calth, reality itself began to tear. What started as localized warp storms rapidly expanded into a massive distortion that astronomers on Macragge named the Ruin Storm. This immense warp phenomenon effectively isolated Ultramar from the rest of the Imperium, making both warp travel and astropathic communication with Terra impossible. The creation of the Ruin Storm represented the culmination of Lorger's plan. By trapping the Ultramarines in their home territory, he prevented Guilliman from reinforcing the Emperor on Terra or coordinating with other loyalist forces. The word-bearer's Primarch had effectively removed the largest legion from the wider conflict at a stroke, while simultaneously forcing them to expend their strength defending their home realm against a multi-pronged assault. Faced with this strategic isolation, Guilliman was forced to make difficult decisions. With no way to determine the status of the wider Imperium or receive guidance from Terra, he implemented contingency protocols that he had developed years earlier but never expected to use. These protocols, codenamed Imperium Secundus, established a framework for preserving imperial civilization should communication with Terra become impossible for an extended period. The core premise of Imperium Secundus was pragmatic. Rather than allowing human worlds to fall into anarchy or Xenos domination during a prolonged isolation, Ultramar would serve as a rallying point for loyalist forces and a preserve of imperial culture and technology. Guilliman did not intend to replace the Emperor or establish a rival Imperium. He sought to maintain a bastion of humanity until contact with Terra could be restored. The implementation of this contingency began with the consolidation of forces. Guilliman ordered the evacuation of outlying worlds that could not be effectively defended, concentrating his military assets around core systems. He established new production facilities to replace those lost to word-bearers' attacks, focusing particularly on munitions, void ship components, and medical supplies. Most controversially, he reorganized the civilian governance structure, placing trusted Ultramarines officers in key administrative positions to ensure stability during the crisis. The arrival of the Blood Angels Legion, led by Sanguinius, provided crucial reinforcement to the beleaguered Ultramar. Having been similarly cut off from Terra by the ruined storm, Sanguinius brought approximately 30,000 Astartes to join Guilliman's defense efforts. Shortly thereafter, Lion El'Jonson arrived with elements of the Dark Angels, further strengthening the loyalist position. With 3 Primarchs now gathered in Ultramar, the question of leadership became paramount. Though Imperium Secundus was Guilliman's creation, he recognized that his talents lay in administration and strategic planning rather than symbolic leadership. After considerable deliberation among the 3 brothers, Sanguinius was proclaimed regent of Imperium Secundus, with Guilliman serving as Lord Warden and El'Jonson as Lord Protector. This triumvirate faced immediate challenges beyond the ongoing word-bearers' assault. Refugees from across the sector flooded into protected systems, straining resources and creating humanitarian crises. Dark Angel's intelligence assets reported increasing Night Lord's activity along the northern boundaries of Ultramar, suggesting that Conrad Kerr's legion might join the attack. Most concerning were reports from Mechanicum adepts that the Ruin Storm was continuing to expand, potentially threatening even the core worlds of Ultramar if its growth remained unchecked. Despite these mounting difficulties, the defense of Ultramar gradually stabilized. Ultramarines forces, reinforced by Blood Angels and Dark Angels contingents, began reclaiming worlds lost in the initial Word-Bearers' onslaught. The Forge world of Connor was liberated after a brutal 3-month campaign, restoring crucial production capacity. On Calth, the Underworld War reached a turning point when Ultramarines forces captured a Word-Bearer's ritual site, disrupting the sorcerous activities that had empowered their demonic allies. The most significant victory came at the Battle of Satha, where a combined force of all 3 loyalist legions intercepted and destroyed a Word-Bearer's fleet, attempting to assault the Pharos device, an ancient Xenos artifact that Guilliman had begun using as an alternative to warp-based navigation. The destruction of this fleet marked the effective end of the Word-Bearers' offensive capability in the region, forcing them to retreat to defensible positions rather than continuing their advance. Throughout this period, Guilliman never abandoned hope of re-establishing contact with Terra. He dispatched dozens of explorer vessels to probe the boundaries of the Ruin Storm, seeking any path that might allow communication with the wider Imperium. These missions were extremely hazardous, with many ships lost to warp predators or navigational failures, but they gradually mapped the contours of the immense storm, identifying regions of relative stability that might eventually provide a route out of isolation. The Codex Astartes stands as perhaps the most influential military document in Imperial history. its impact extending far beyond its original purpose as a reorganization plan for the fractured Space Marine legions. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, as the Imperium struggled to rebuild from near destruction, Roboute Guilliman recognized that the very structure that had made the Astartes so effective also created an existential vulnerability. The concentration of power within massive legions had nearly doomed humanity when half of these forces turned traitor. The Codex represented Guilliman's solution, a comprehensive framework that would preserve the Astartes' military effectiveness while preventing any single commander from wielding enough power to threaten the Imperium again. Work on the Codex began during the latter stages of the Scouring, the campaign to drive the traitor forces from Imperial space following their defeat at Terra. Guilliman retreated to his private sanctum within the Fortress of Hera, surrounded by historical texts, after action reports, and data slates containing detailed analyses of thousands of battles. For nearly 7 years, he labored on this monumental work, consulting with loyalist Primarchs, Mechanicum weaponsmiths, Imperial army generals, and even the remaining members of the Legio Custodes. The resulting document exceeded 100,000 pages in its original form, divided into 5 primary sections: organizational structure, tactical doctrine, equipment specifications, recruitment and training, and interaction with Imperial authorities. Each section represented a comprehensive examination of its subject, incorporating both theoretical principles and practical applications. Unlike many Imperial texts that relied on dogma and tradition, the Codex was relentlessly empirical, with each recommendation supported by extensive battlefield data and logical analysis. The most revolutionary aspect of the Codex was its organizational framework. Guilliman decreed that the legions would be divided into smaller formations called chapters, each numbering approximately 1,000 battle brothers. This seemingly arbitrary number was actually carefully calculated, large enough to handle most military threats independently, but small enough to prevent any single commander from controlling excessive force. The Ultramarines Legion, which numbered approximately 250,000 Astartes at the heresy's conclusion, was divided into roughly 250 separate chapters during what became known as the Second Founding. Each chapter would maintain complete autonomy, with its own command structure, support personnel, equipment, and recruitment territories. This independence extended to tactical doctrine as well. While the Codex provided extensive guidelines for combat operations, Guilliman explicitly stated that chapters should adapt these principles to their specific circumstances rather than following them blindly. This nuance was often overlooked by later imperial authorities, who increasingly treated the Codex as inviolable scripture rather than a flexible framework. The standard chapter structure outlined in the Codex established 10 companies of 100 Marines each, with specialized roles assigned to different companies. The first company consisted of veteran Marines equipped with Terminator armor or other specialized wargear. Companies 2 through 5 were designated as battle companies, containing a mix of tactical, assault, and devastator squads to provide maximum flexibility. Companies 6 and 7 were composed entirely of tactical squads, while the 8th featured assault specialists, and the 9th consisted of devastator squads. The 10th company contained scout Marines, new recruits who had not yet completed their full transformation into Astartes. This organization maximized operational flexibility while maintaining clear chains of command. Battle companies could operate independently for extended periods, combining different squad types as tactical situations demanded. When larger forces were required, multiple companies could be deployed together under the command of the chapter master or his appointed captain. The system allowed for both decentralized operations across multiple war zones and concentrated force when facing major threats. Beyond mere organization, the Codex provided detailed guidance on virtually every aspect of Space Marine operations. It contained hundreds of tactical formations for different battlefield scenarios, from urban combat to void warfare. It established protocols for equipment maintenance, ammunition expenditure rates, and supply chain management. It even addressed psychological factors, with sections devoted to maintaining morale during extended campaigns and preventing battle fatigue among veteran Marines. The implementation of the Codex's recommendations varied significantly among the surviving legions. The Ultramarines, unsurprisingly, embraced their Primarch's work completely, dividing into successor chapters that maintained close cultural and training ties while operating as independent entities. The Imperial Fists, White Scars, and Iron Hands similarly accepted the Codex, though each maintained certain cultural traditions that sometimes diverged from Guilliman's guidelines. Other legions proved more resistant. The Space Wolves, led by Leman Russ until his disappearance, flatly refused to divide their forces, citing their unique genetic factors and cultural traditions. The Blood Angels, while nominally accepting the Codex structure, maintained closer ties between their successor chapters than Guilliman had intended, largely due to the need for shared resources to manage their genetic curse. The Salamanders and Raven Guard, already severely depleted by the heresy, effectively became Codex chapters simply due to their reduced numbers, though both maintained distinctive tactical approaches that sometimes diverged from Codex recommendations. This varied implementation led to significant tension during what historians later termed the Codex crisis. Guilliman, backed by several other Primarchs including Jagatai Khan and Rogel Dorn, initially insisted on mandatory compliance, viewing the reorganization as essential for Imperial security. The Space Wolves' refusal nearly led to open conflict between loyalist forces still reeling from the heresy. The crisis was ultimately resolved through compromise. Chapters that maintained their legion structure would accept increased oversight from Imperial authorities and limitations on their recruitment and deployment patterns. With the organizational framework established, the second founding began in earnest approximately 7 years after the heresy's conclusion. The process of dividing the legions proved enormously complex, involving not just the separation of personnel, but the allocation of equipment, vessels, fortress monasteries, and recruitment worlds. For the Ultramarines, this division was particularly extensive due to their vast numbers and holdings. Notable chapters created from the Ultramarines during this period included the Genesis chapter, which maintained the closest ties to their progenitors, the Nova Marines, known for their distinctive quartered heraldry, the Patriarchs of Ulixis, who specialized in void warfare, and the Aurora chapter, who developed expertise in rapid deployment operations. Each received a portion of the Legion's assets, including battle barges, strike cruisers, armor, and relics. Most significantly, each was granted a world from which to recruit and establish their fortress monastery. The distribution of gene seed proved particularly challenging. To ensure that no single disaster could wipe out a chapter's ability to replenish its ranks, Guilliman established the system of gene seed tithing, requiring each chapter to regularly submit samples to Mars for storage and testing. This system created a strategic reserve that could be used to found new chapters in the future, while allowing the Adeptus Mechanicus to monitor for genetic drift or corruption. For chapters derived from less stable gene lines, this monitoring would become increasingly intrusive over the millennia, creating tension between the Astartes and the Mechanicus. Beyond organizational structure, the Codex Astartes established tactical doctrines that would influence space marine operations for millennia. Guilliman's approach emphasized flexibility and adaptability rather than rigid adherence to templates. The Codex contained hundreds of combat maneuvers, each with variations for different terrain types and enemy compositions. These ranged from small unit actions like the Tarantus pattern assault to chapter-level operations such as the Damocles deployment. Central to Codex tactical doctrine was the concept of combined arms. Guilliman rejected specialization at the chapter level, insisting that each chapter maintain capabilities across all aspects of warfare. This approach contrasted with the Legion-era tendency towards specialization, where formations like the Iron Warriors focused almost exclusively on siege warfare, while the White Scars specialized in rapid assault. Under the Codex system, even chapters that developed particular expertise in certain combat styles maintained basic proficiency across all disciplines. The Codex also established standardized equipment specifications, creating a common material culture across the divided Astartes forces. It detailed the construction and maintenance requirements for everything from bolters to land raiders, establishing performance parameters and expected operational lifespans. These specifications allowed for more efficient logistics and simplified the training of tech marines, who could move between chapters if necessary and still understand the equipment they would encounter. Perhaps most importantly, the Codex addressed the relationship between Space Marine chapters and the broader Imperium. Guilliman was adamant that Astartes were defenders of humanity, not its rulers. The Codex explicitly prohibited chapters from controlling civilian governments or establishing political dominion over their recruitment worlds. It mandated cooperation with imperial authorities, including the Administratum, Adeptus Mechanicus, and Imperial Guard, while still preserving the chapter's operational autonomy in military matters. These provisions reflected Guilliman's concern about the potential for Astartes to become disconnected from the humanity they were created to protect. He had witnessed firsthand how legions like the Night Lords and World Eaters had developed cultures that viewed baseline humans with contempt or indifference. The Codex sought to prevent this drift by keeping chapters engaged with the broader Imperium while limiting their power to dominate it. Over the 10 millennia following its creation, the Codex Astartes evolved from practical manual to quasi-religious text. As the Imperium became increasingly superstitious and tradition-bound, many chapters began treating Guilliman's tactical recommendations as inviolable commands rather than adaptable guidelines. This transformation would have horrified the Primarch, who had explicitly warned against dogmatic thinking in the Codex's introduction. Nevertheless, even in this distorted form, the Codex continued to shape Astartes' operations across the galaxy. The organizational structure proved remarkably durable, with most chapters maintaining the 10-company format with only minor variations. Tactical doctrines outlined in the Codex remained effective against a wide range of adversaries, from Orc-Waz to Eldar strike forces. Equipment specifications ensured interoperability between chapters operating in joint deployments, allowing forces that had never fought together to coordinate effectively with minimal preparation. Some chapters embraced the Codex more fully than others. The Ultramarines and their direct successors remain the most orthodox adherents, often referring directly to specific passages when planning operations. Others, like the Black Templars, nominally accepted the Codex while significantly diverging from its organizational recommendations. A small minority, primarily the Space Wolves and their limited successors, rejected the Codex entirely, maintaining their own distinct traditions and structures. These variations created tension within the Adeptus Astartes, occasionally erupting into open conflict. The most notable instance occurred during the Abyssal Crusade in the 37th millennium, when disagreements over Codex interpretation contributed to the excommunication of 30 chapters sent on a penitent crusade into the Eye of Terror. Similar disputes arose during the Wars of Apostasy, the Redemption Crusades, and dozens of smaller conflicts throughout imperial history. Despite these controversies, the Codex system succeeded in its primary objective, preventing another heresy-scale betrayal. By distributing Astartes' forces across 1,000 independent chapters, Guilliman ensured that no single commander could control enough transhuman warriors to threaten the Imperium's existence. When chapters did fall to chaos or Xeno's corruption, their limited size prevented them from causing catastrophic damage before other loyalist forces could respond. The Codex's influence extended beyond the Adeptus Astartes to shape other imperial organizations. The Adeptus Mechanicus adopted elements of its logistical frameworks for their Skitarii legions. The Imperial Guard incorporated modified versions of its small unit tactics into their training regimens. Even the Adeptus Administratum borrowed from its organizational principles when restructuring in the aftermath of the heresy. For individual Space Marines, the Codex provided more than just tactical guidelines. It offered a philosophical framework that helped them understand their place in the Imperium. Guilliman had included extensive discussions of the Astartes' purpose, emphasizing their role as protectors rather than conquerors. These sections helped many chapters maintain their humanity despite the psychological changes caused by their transformation and the traumatic experiences of endless warfare. The wisdom of Guilliman's approach became increasingly apparent as the millennia passed. Chapters that adhered closely to Codex principles generally maintained their combat effectiveness and loyalty, while those that diverged significantly often faced operational challenges or corruption. The Astral Claw's transformation into the Red Corsairs, the excesses of the Marines' Malevolent, and the fall of the Soul Drinkers all stemmed partially from departures from Codex philosophy, if not its specific tactical recommendations. As threats to the Imperium evolved, so too did interpretations of the Codex. The Tyranid invasions beginning in the 41st millennium required significant tactical adaptations, as did the resurgence of Necron dynasties and the emergence of Tau expansion. Chapters facing these new enemies developed supplementary doctrines that built upon Guilliman's framework while addressing challenges he could not have anticipated. The Ultramarines themselves led many of these adaptations, demonstrating that reverence for the Codex did not require rigid adherence to its every detail. The Ultramarines' command structure represents one of the most efficient and well-organized hierarchies within the Adeptus Astartes, embodying Guilliman's vision of clear authority, distributed responsibility, and meritocratic advancement. At its apex stands the Chapter Master, a position that carries not only military authority over 1,000 of the Emperor's finest warriors, but also ceremonial leadership of the entire realm of Ultramar. Marnius Augustus Calgar has held this esteemed position for over 4 centuries, longer than any chapter master since the legendary Agnathio in the 36th millennium. Born on the mining world of Quintarn, Calgar's journey to leadership began unremarkably, one of hundreds of aspirants selected for testing in a routine recruitment cycle. His exceptional performance during the brutal trials caught the attention of then Chapter Master Gallatin, who personally oversaw the final stages of his training. After his ascension to full battle brother status, Calgar served with distinction in the 4th Company during the Corinthian Crusade, earning recognition for his tactical acumen during the siege of Arios Quintus. Calgar's rise through the chapter's ranks accelerated following the Battle of Nart's Landing, where he assumed command of the Ultramarines contingent after Captain Idius fell to Eldar fire. His improvised counterattack not only secured victory, but preserved critical supply lines for 3 neighboring systems. This action earned him promotion to captain of the 4th Company, a position from which he would further distinguish himself during the First Tyrannic War. As Chapter Master, Calgar's responsibilities extend far beyond mere battlefield command. He serves as the living embodiment of Ultramarines' values, his decisions and deportment setting the standard for the entire chapter. He oversees recruitment, training, equipment allocation, and deployment strategies for all 10 companies. Beyond military matters, he represents the chapter in diplomatic relations with other imperial organizations, from the High Lords of Terra to local planetary governors across Ultramar. The physical trappings of Calgar's office reflect its importance. He wears the armor of Antilochus, an ancient Terminator suit dating back to the Great Crusade, enhanced with additional field generators and blessed by the chapter's Master of Sanctity. His primary weapons are the Gauntlets of Ultramar, artifacts recovered from a Chaos Champion by Primarch Guilliman himself during the Great Crusade. These massive power fists incorporate built-in bolters, allowing Calgar to deliver devastating close combat damage while maintaining ranged firepower. The Chapter Master's personal heraldry features the Ultramarine symbol prominently, supplemented by campaign badges from dozens of major conflicts and the distinctive laurel wreath that denotes his supreme authority. His throne room within the Fortress of Hera serves as both administrative center and ceremonial space, its walls adorned with battle standards from the chapter's 10 millennia of service. Directly beneath the Chapter Master in authority stands the Chapter Council, a flexible advisory body comprising the senior officers of the Ultramarines. Permanent members include the masters of each specialized order, Sanctity, the Forge, the Apothecarian, and the Librarius, along with the captains of all 10 companies. Additional participants may be summoned based on the matters under discussion, including veteran sergeants, fleet officers, or even non-Astartes advisors from the broader Ultramarine governance structure. The council meets quarterly under normal circumstances, though Kage can convene emergency sessions as needed. Discussions follow formal protocols established by Guilliman himself, with speaking rights allocated according to seniority and relevance to the topic at hand. While the chapter master retains final authority over all decisions, the council provides essential perspective and expertise that informs his judgments. Among the specialized masters who serve on the council, the Master of Sanctity holds particular influence. Currently occupied by Chaplain Orton Cassius, this position oversees the spiritual health of the entire chapter. Cassius, a veteran of over 3 centuries of service, bears the distinctive skull helmet of his office, further modified with bionic augmentations necessitated by grievous wounds suffered during the tyrannic wars. His scarred visage and uncompromising demeanor belie a deep compassion for his battle brothers and an unwavering commitment to maintaining their connection to Guilliman's vision. The Master of Sanctity supervises the chapter's corps of chaplains, each assigned to a specific company to monitor morale, preserve traditions, and ensure adherence to the Codex Astartes. These spiritual leaders conduct daily rituals that reinforce Ultramarines' values and commemorate the chapter's storied history. During combat operations, they remain at the forefront, inspiring their brothers through both word and deed, their Crozius Arcanum weapons symbolizing both spiritual authority and martial prowess. Parallel to the spiritual leadership provided by the chaplaincy, the librarius manages the chapter's psychic assets under the direction of Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius. Widely acknowledged as the most gifted psyker in the chapter's history, Tigurius possesses abilities that approach those of the legendary librarians of the Great Crusade era. His psychic hood, an enhanced model crafted by Magos Cybus of Theralen, allows him to channel and control warp energies with exceptional precision. Tigurius oversees approximately 20 full librarians of varying ranks, from Lexicanium to Codicil to Epistolary, each trained in both combat applications of their gifts and scholarly pursuits. The librarius maintains the chapter's historical records, manages its extensive collection of tactical treatises, and monitors psychic threats that might endanger Ultramar. During major campaigns, Tigurius assigns librarians to specific companies based on tactical requirements and psychic compatibility with the commanding captain. The material needs of the chapter fall under the purview of the Master of the Forge, Fenias Maxim. A veteran of over 2 centuries of service, Maxim began his career as a battle brother in the 9th Company before his technical aptitude led to his selection for training on Mars. After 15 years studying with the Adeptus Mechanicus, he returned to the chapter as a full tech marine, bringing with him not only technical expertise, but also valuable connections within the Mechanicus hierarchy. Maxim commands the chapter's corps of tech marines, each a master of maintaining and repairing the Ultramarines' vast arsenal of weapons and vehicles. These specialists undergo extensive training both within the chapter and during their sojourn on Mars, emerging with a unique blend of Astartes combat doctrine and Mechanicus technical knowledge. Their distinctive red armor symbolizes their connection to the Adeptus Mechanicus, while ultramarine blue components remind them of their primary loyalty. The physical health of the chapter rests with Master Apothecary Corpus Helix, whose expertise in Astartes physiology is renowned throughout Ultramar. Helix supervises the chapter's corps of apothecaries, who serve dual roles as battlefield medics and guardians of the chapter's genetic future. During combat operations, these white-armored specialists extract the progenitor glands from fallen battle brothers, ensuring that their gene seed can contribute to future generations of Ultramarines. Between deployments, they oversee the complex process of creating new Astartes, from initial screening of aspirants to final implantation of the Black Carapace. The chapter's 10 companies, each led by a captain of exceptional ability, form the primary operational units of the Ultramarines. These officers combine tactical expertise with leadership skills honed through decades or even centuries of service. While all conform to the basic requirements of the Codex Astartes, each brings a distinctive personality and approach to command that influences their company's character. First among these captains in formal rank is Severus Agamemnon, master of the 1st Company and regent of Ultramar. This dual role makes him Calgar's designated successor should the chapter master fall in battle or otherwise become unable to lead. Guilliman commands the chapter's veterans, warriors with at least a century of service who have earned the right to wear sacred Terminator armor into battle. His company rarely deploys as a single unit, instead providing veteran squads to reinforce other companies during particularly challenging operations. Guilliman's temperament suits his position, methodical, detail-oriented, and deeply versed in the Codex Astartes. His personal heraldry features the crossed lightning bolts that designate 1st Company status, supplemented by the ceremonial seal of the Regent of Ultramar. In battle, he typically wears Terminator armor, equipped with a storm bolter and power sword, though he has been known to take up a thunder hammer against heavily armored opponents. Captain Cato Sicarius of the 2nd Company presents a stark contrast to Guilliman's measured approach. Brash, charismatic, and supremely confident, Sicarius has compiled a combat record that rivals legendary heroes of previous eras. As Grand Duke of Talisar and Master of the Watch, he holds significant authority both within the chapter and the broader governance of Ultramar. His battlefield accomplishments include victory over the Tau during the defense of Ultramar and the slaying of the Eldar Autarch Iriel during the Battle of the Black Nebula. Sicarius leads from the front, his artificer armor decorated with numerous campaign badges and honor markings that chronicle his storied career. His weapon of choice, the Talisarian Tempest Blade, was gifted to him by the nobles of his homeworld following his defense of their planet against Dark Eldar raiders. The captain's aggressive tactics sometimes push the boundaries of Codex doctrine, though he maintains that his approaches represent adaptations rather than deviations from Guilliman's teachings. The 3rd Company, designated the Veteran Company, operates under the command of Captain Mikkel Fabian, a relatively recent appointee who assumed leadership following the death of the renowned Ardias during the Damocles Crusade. Fabian's background as a former sergeant in the 1st Company brings valuable veteran experience to his command style. His company specializes in Zone Mortalis operations, boarding actions, Hive City warfare, and other confined space combat scenarios that require specialized training and equipment. Captain Uriel Ventress leads the 4th Company, known as the Defenders of Ultramar, for their frequent deployment to protect the chapter's home realm. Ventress gained notoriety for his unconventional decision to lead a kill team into a Tyranid Hive ship during the Tarsi's Ultra campaign, a mission that violated strict Codex protocols but ultimately proved crucial to Imperial victory. This action, along with his subsequent Deathwatch service, has given Ventress a broader tactical perspective than many of his peers, though it has also made him the subject of controversy among more traditional elements within the chapter. The remaining battle companies, 5th through 7th, serve as the chapter's primary deployment forces, each maintaining the balanced composition of tactical, assault, and devastator squads prescribed by the Codex Astartes. The reserve companies, 8th through 10th, focus on specialized training and support roles, with the 8th consisting entirely of assault specialists, the 9th composed of devastator squads, and the 10th dedicated to scout marines still undergoing their final implementation and training phases. Beyond the standard company structure, the Ultramarines maintain several elite formations that operate outside the normal chain of command. Most prestigious among these is the Honor Guard, a cadre of champions who serve as the chapter master's personal bodyguard and ceremonial escort. These warriors, each selected for both combat prowess and exemplary adherence to the Ultramarine ethos, wear distinctive armor featuring gold helmets and ornate blue and white heraldry. The Honor Guard traces its lineage directly to Guilliman's personal guard during the Great Crusade, maintaining many ancient traditions from that era. Its members carry relic weapons drawn from the chapter's armory, many dating back to the founding of the Imperium. In battle, they form a formidable fighting unit, combining veteran skill with the finest equipment available to the chapter. During ceremonial functions, they represent the Ultramarines' martial heritage, their precise drill movements and immaculate appearance embodying the discipline for which the chapter is renowned. Another specialized formation, the Tyrannic War Veterans, emerged from the existential threat posed by Hive Fleet Behemoth. These battle brothers, drawn from various companies, have all faced Tyranid forces and survived to share their expertise. Under the leadership of Chaplain Cassius, they have developed specialized tactics and equipment modifications specifically designed to counter the Xenos threat. Their armor often bears distinctive markings, including the skull and starburst emblem, that designates their veteran status and specialized training. The Ultramarines' relationship with the broader Imperium, particularly the Adeptus Terra, reflects their unique historical position. As the progenitors of more successor chapters than any other bloodline and the guardians of Ultramar, they maintain significant influence within imperial power structures. The High Lords of Terra recognize the strategic importance of Ultramar as a stable bastion in an increasingly threatened Imperium, affording the Ultramarines greater autonomy than many other chapters receive. This relationship has evolved over the millennia, with periods of closer cooperation alternating with times of greater independence. During the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium, the Ultramarines provided crucial support to Lord Commander Courland, deploying significant forces to Terra itself. Conversely, during the Nova Terra Interregnum, the chapter maintained a more detached stance, focusing on securing the borders of Ultramar while the broader Imperium struggled with internal division. The Ultramarines' interactions with the Adeptus Mechanicus have generally remained positive, bolstered by ancient pacts dating back to the Great Crusade. The Forge World of Connor within Ultramar facilitates direct cooperation, with regular exchanges of personnel and technology benefiting both organizations. Similar cooperative relationships exist with the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and the Navis Nobilite, essential partners in maintaining communication and transportation across Ultramar's considerable expanse. Relations with the Inquisition have proven more complex. The Ultramarines' traditional emphasis on rational analysis and evidence-based decision-making sometimes clashes with the more dogmatic and secretive approach favored by many Inquisitors. Nevertheless, the chapter's unimpeachable loyalty record has prevented serious conflicts, and individual Inquisitors often seek Ultramarine assistance for operations requiring Astartes support. Within the broader Adeptus Astartes community, the Ultramarines occupy a position of significant influence due to both their Primarch's authorship of the Codex Astartes and their numerous successor chapters. The Sons of Guilliman form the largest single bloodline among the Space Marines, with estimates suggesting they comprise approximately half of all active chapters. This extensive family of related chapters, often referred to as the Ultramarines Brotherhood, represents a substantial power block within the Adeptus Astartes, though one that rarely acts in concert except during the gravest threats. The Ultramarines' command structure has proven remarkably resilient over 10 millennia of continuous warfare, adapting to changing threats while maintaining core principles established by Guilliman himself. This balance between tradition and pragmatic evolution exemplifies the chapter's approach to all aspects of their existence, honoring their storied past while preparing effectively for future challenges. As new threats emerge along the borders of Ultramar and beyond, the Masters of Macragge stand ready to meet them, guided by the wisdom of their Primarch and their own accumulated experience across countless battlefields. The path to becoming an Ultramarine begins long before a neophyte first sets foot in the hallowed halls of the Fortress of Hera. Throughout Ultramar, youth who display exceptional physical and mental attributes are identified by chapter serfs and representatives who constantly assess potential candidates. Unlike some chapters that rely on barbaric death worlds or brutal gladiatorial contests, the Ultramarines seek individuals who demonstrate not only physical prowess, but also intelligence, leadership potential, and moral character. Once selected, aspirants are transported to Macragge to begin their transformation. The initial phase occurs within the Aegisless Barracks, a sprawling complex nestled in the lower levels of the Fortress of Hera. Here, candidates undergo a series of increasingly demanding trials designed to test every aspect of their capabilities. The challenge of Macragge requires aspirants to scale the treacherous northern face of Mount Hera without equipment, battling exposure and predatory native fauna. The trial of knowledge tests their intellectual capacity through complex tactical simulations and ethical dilemmas drawn from actual Ultramarine campaigns. Most demanding is the trial of faith, where aspirants must demonstrate unwavering courage by standing their ground against charging Macragge lions armed with only a ceremonial spear. These trials eliminate approximately 90% of candidates, with many perishing in the attempt. Those who survive progress to the next phase, surgical implantation of the gene-seed organs that will transform them into Astartes. Master Apothecary Corpus Helix personally oversees this process for each batch of neophytes, monitoring their body's acceptance of Guilliman's genetic legacy. The Ultramarines gene line remains one of the most stable among all chapters, with implantation success rates approaching 95%, significantly higher than the Adeptus Astartes average. As their bodies transform, neophytes begin their formal instruction in the chapter's combat doctrine. Training takes place in specialized facilities throughout the Fortress of Hera, each designed to simulate different battlefield environments. The Dome of Tactics features hololithic projection systems that can recreate any terrain from barren desert to dense urban sprawl. The Halls of Echo are acoustically engineered chambers where neophytes learn to filter battlefield noise and maintain unit cohesion amid sensory chaos. Most infamous is the Chamber of Tempering, a massive environmental simulator capable of reproducing extreme conditions from vacuum exposure to the crushing pressure of ocean depths. Veteran Sergeant Cluton of the 10th Company oversees the neophytes' initial weapons training, beginning with the basic bolter drills codified by Guilliman himself. Neophytes spend thousands of hours mastering this iconic weapon, learning to field strip, maintain, and fire it with mechanical precision. Only after demonstrating proficiency with the bolter are they introduced to other weapons in the Astartes arsenal: combat knives, grenades, pistols, and eventually heavy weapons for those who display the aptitude. Combat instruction extends far beyond mere weapons handling. Sergeant Alixis, a former assault marine with over 2 centuries of service, trains neophytes in hand-to-hand combat techniques. His methodology combines traditional Macragge martial arts with adaptations designed for Astartes physiology, creating a fighting style that maximizes the advantages of transhuman strength and speed. Neophytes practice these techniques against servitor opponents of increasing difficulty, culminating in sparring matches against fully trained battle brothers from the reserve companies. Throughout this physical training, equal emphasis is placed on tactical education. Veteran officers conduct daily seminars analyzing historical battles from the chapter's extensive archives. Neophytes study not only victories, but also defeats, learning that even the finest warriors can fall if they fail to adapt to changing circumstances. The lessons of Calth, where Ultramarines forces suffered catastrophic losses due to the unexpected betrayal of the word-bearers, feature prominently in these tactical discussions. Chaplain Orton Cassius personally oversees the neophytes' indoctrination into chapter traditions and values. His scarred visage and battle-worn armor serve as living testimony to the sacrifices required of an Astartes, while his uncompromising standards ensure that only those truly worthy join the chapter's ranks. Under his guidance, neophytes memorize the litanies of battle, study the philosophical underpinnings of the Codex Astartes, and internalize the core Ultramarine values of courage, honor, and wisdom. After approximately 2 years of training and biological transformation, successful neophytes are assigned to the 10th Company as Scout Marines. Under the command of Captain Antalochus, they deploy on actual combat missions, applying their training in controlled operational environments. Scout Marines typically operate behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence and disrupting supply chains while avoiding direct confrontation with superior forces. This phase of their development tests not only their combat skills, but also their judgment and initiative, qualities valued as highly as martial prowess within the Ultramarines. Scout service continues for variable periods, typically 5-10 years, until the individual demonstrates readiness for full battle brother status. The final implantation of the black carapace marks their physical completion as Astartes, allowing neural interface with power armor. A solemn ceremony in the chapter Reclusiam follows, where the new battle brother swears his oaths of loyalty before the assembled company captains and receives his first suit of power armor, painted in the distinctive blue of the Ultramarines. This comprehensive training regimen produces warriors who embody the Ultramarines' approach to warfare, disciplined, adaptable, and thoroughly versed in Codex doctrine. Unlike chapters that specialize in particular combat styles, the Ultramarines train to excel across all battlefield environments and tactical situations. This versatility has proven crucial to their survival across 10 millennia of continuous warfare against wildly varying opponents. The Ultramarines' combat doctrine derives directly from Guilliman's military philosophy as codified in the Codex Astartes. At its core lies the concept of balanced force application, employing precisely the right amount of power in exactly the right location to achieve maximum effect with minimum waste. This approach contrasts sharply with the overwhelming force doctrine favored by chapters like the Imperial Fists or the shock assault tactics preferred by the Blood Angels. Tactical flexibility serves as the cornerstone of Ultramarine operations. Company captains maintain the authority to adapt their approach based on battlefield conditions, enemy composition, and strategic objectives. The Codex provides hundreds of tactical formations suitable for different scenarios, but these are treated as guidelines rather than rigid templates. Captain Uriel Ventress demonstrated this adaptive mindset during the Pavanus campaign, where he modified standard urban warfare protocols to counter Dark Eldar ambush tactics, developing the rotating spearhead formation that has since been incorporated into Codex supplements. This flexibility extends to force composition as well. Battle companies deploy with balanced elements of tactical, assault, and devastator squads, allowing commanders to respond to changing battlefield conditions without waiting for reinforcement. During the Battle of Cold Steel Ridge, Captain Sicarius demonstrated this advantage by rapidly reconfiguring his forces when Tau battlesuit reinforcements arrived unexpectedly. Tactical squads transitioned to fire support roles, while assault elements executed a flanking maneuver that exploited a weakness in the Tau defensive formation, securing victory despite the enemy's technological advantages. The Ultramarines' approach to warfare emphasizes thorough planning and intelligence gathering before commitment to battle. Scout elements typically operate for days or even weeks ahead of main force deployment, mapping terrain, identifying enemy strongpoints, and assessing defensive capabilities. This information feeds into detailed operation plans that consider multiple contingencies and establish clear decision points for field commanders. Once battle is joined, Ultramarine forces typically advance in coordinated multi-unit formations designed to provide mutual support. Unlike some chapters that favor individual heroics, the Ultramarines emphasize unit cohesion and coordinated action. Squad sergeants maintain tight Vox discipline, providing regular status updates to company command while implementing tactical directives with disciplined precision. This communication network allows company captains to maintain situational awareness across the entire battlefield, shifting resources as needed to exploit opportunities or reinforce threatened sectors. The chapter's approach to different enemy types demonstrates their analytical methodology. Against orcs, Ultramarine doctrine emphasizes targeting leadership figures and supply concentrations, rather than engaging the numerically superior rank and file in direct confrontation. When facing Eldar, they deploy multiple redundant sensor arrays to counter the Xenos' holographic deception technologies, while maintaining flexible reserve elements to respond to webway insertions. Chaos forces are met with carefully coordinated combined arms assaults designed to prevent enemy sorcerers from establishing ritual sites or summoning warp entities. This adaptive approach proved particularly valuable during the Tyrannic Wars, when the chapter faced an entirely new form of enemy with unfamiliar biology and tactics. After the devastating losses suffered during the battle for Macragge, the Ultramarines systematically compiled and analyzed all available data on Tyranid organisms, developing specialized counter-tactics for each bioform. Chaplain Cassius established the Tyrannic War Veterans as a dedicated cadre of specialists who could disseminate this knowledge throughout the chapter and its successors. The Tyrannic War Veterans represent one of several specialized formations that operate outside standard codex parameters. These battle brothers, drawn from various companies based on their experience fighting the Great Devourer, undergo additional training focused specifically on anti-Tyranid tactics. Their armor often features distinctive modifications, including enhanced respiratory filters to counter spore-based bioweapons and reinforced neck seals to protect against corrosive ichor. In battle, they typically deploy as squad leaders or advisors attached to regular Ultramarine units, providing tactical guidance and specialized knowledge. Another elite formation, the Victrix Guard, emerged following Guilliman's return in the 42nd millennium. This bodyguard unit combines elements of the traditional chapter honor guard with veterans selected for their exceptional tactical acumen. Clad in distinctive armor featuring ornate gold trim and azure blue plumes, the Victrix Guard serves as both ceremonial escort and elite combat formation. Under the leadership of Captain Cato Sicarius, they have developed specialized tactics for operating alongside their Primarch, whose transhuman capabilities far exceed even those of standard Astartes. The Ultramarines' vehicle doctrine emphasizes mobility and coordinated support rather than overwhelming firepower. Land raiders and predator tanks typically deploy in hunter-killer groups of 3 to 5 vehicles, combining complementary weapons loadouts to address different target types. Thunderhawk gunships provide close air support coordinated through dedicated communication channels with ground forces, ensuring precise target designation and minimizing friendly fire incidents. During the Damnos campaign, this integrated approach allowed Ultramarine armored elements to effectively counter Necron monoliths despite their technological disadvantage, using coordinated multi-vector assaults to overwhelm the Xenos vehicle's repair protocols. Dreadnoughts occupy a special place in Ultramarine tactical doctrine, serving as both devastating assault platforms and living repositories of chapter wisdom. Unlike some chapters that deploy these venerable warriors only in dire circumstances, the Ultramarines regularly incorporate dreadnoughts into their battle plans, particularly for operations requiring breach capabilities or heavy close-range firepower. Venerable Telemachus, interred after suffering mortal wounds during the Gothic War, has developed specialized urban combat tactics that maximize the psychological impact of dreadnought deployments, while minimizing their vulnerability to anti-armor weapons in confined spaces. The chapter's approach to void warfare demonstrates similar sophistication. Fleet elements typically operate in balanced battle groups, combining different vessel classes to address various threat profiles. Strike cruisers serve as the backbone of these formations, providing both transport capacity for Astartes deployment and significant combat capability. During the Badab War, Ultramarine void tactics proved particularly effective against the more aggressive approach favored by the Astral Claws, using coordinated fighter screens and precision lance strikes to disrupt enemy formations, while avoiding direct ship-to-ship engagements except from positions of advantage. Beyond conventional warfare, the Ultramarines maintain specialized capabilities for various mission types. The 7th Company includes several squads trained specifically for diplomatic security operations, combining combat prowess with protocol knowledge and enhanced restraint conditioning. The 4th Company maintains expertise in environmental hazard operations, with specialized equipment and tactical doctrines for battlefields compromised by radiation, chemical contamination, or atmospheric degradation. These specialized capabilities allow the chapter to respond effectively to virtually any mission profile without sacrificing their core tactical flexibility. Training for these varied operational requirements continues throughout an Ultramarine service. Even veteran battle brothers regularly participate in combat drills and tactical simulations designed to maintain peak readiness and introduce new doctrinal developments. The chapter maintains extensive training facilities within the Fortress of Hera, including the massive simulator deck, where full company exercises can be conducted using a combination of hololithic projections and servitor opponents. The First Tyrannic War began without warning in the closing years of the 41st millennium. Astropathic communications from the remote world of Tyran ceased abruptly, followed by similar silences across the outlying systems of the eastern fringe. Initial investigation, fleets disappeared without trace, leaving only fragmented distress signals that spoke of living ships and all-consuming swarms. When finally the threat revealed itself fully, it came not as an invasion, but as an onrushing tide of biological horror that would test the Ultramarines as they had not been tested since the dark days of the Horus Heresy. Hive Fleet Behemoth, as it would later be designated by Ordo Xenos taxonomists, approached Ultramar along a broad front, consuming everything in its path. Entire populations vanished overnight, converted into biomass to feed the Tyranid war machine. The first substantial Imperial resistance came at Prandium, once known as the Garden of Ultramar, for its bountiful agricultural output and pristine beauty. The Ultramarines' Third Company, supported by planetary defense forces and elements of the Imperial Guard, attempted to establish defensive positions around major population centers. Captain Ardias of the Third Company quickly recognized the futility of conventional defensive tactics against the overwhelming Tyranid numbers. His forces shifted to a mobile defense, striking at Tyranid synapse creatures while evacuating as many civilians as possible. Despite tactical successes, the strategic situation deteriorated rapidly. Within 20 days, Prandium's defenses collapsed. The planet was consumed so thoroughly that nothing remained but a barren rock stripped of all organic matter, its oceans drained and atmosphere depleted. The fall of Prandium served as a harsh awakening to the true nature of the Tyranid threat. Chapter Master Marnius Calgar ordered the immediate mobilization of the entire Ultramarines chapter, recalling all deployable forces to defend the core worlds of Ultramar. Simultaneously, he dispatched urgent astropathic messages to Terra and neighboring sectors, requesting reinforcement and sharing tactical data on the new enemy. The response proved dismayingly inadequate, with multiple crisis points erupting across the Imperium, including Was Snagrod in the Loki sector and chaos incursions near the Eye of Terror. Few forces could be diverted to the eastern fringe. As Hive Fleet Behemoth continued its inexorable advance toward Macragge, Calgar implemented a desperate strategy. The outlying agricultural worlds of Ispander and Quintarn were reluctantly abandoned after evacuating key personnel and equipment, their remaining populations left to their fate. This painful decision allowed the Ultramarines to concentrate their limited forces around Macragge itself, transforming the chapter homeworld into a fortress designed to break the Tyranid momentum. The orbital defenses of Macragge received significant reinforcement, with weapons platforms and minefields deployed in complex patterns designed to channel the approaching Hive fleet into predetermined kill zones. On the surface, massive defense lasers were established on mountain peaks, while the civilian population was relocated into hardened shelters beneath the planet's major cities. Astropathic choirs worked continuously to maintain communication with Imperial forces throughout the sector, coordinating the movements of battle groups and evacuation fleets. The Ultramarines fleet, commanded by Admiral Holt of the Imperial Navy in coordination with Captain Agamemnon, established a layered defensive perimeter in the Macragge system. The outer sphere consisted of fast attack vessels and monitor stations designed to provide early warning and conduct hit and run attacks against Tyranid vanguard organisms. The middle sphere combined Imperial Navy cruisers with the chapter's strike cruisers, positioned to engage the main Tyranid fleet elements. The inner sphere, closest to Macragge itself, contained the heaviest vessels, including the chapter's battle barges and several Imperial Navy battleships. When the Tyranid fleet entered the Macragge system, it did so with overwhelming force. Thousands of bio-ships of varying sizes descended upon the Imperial defenses like a cloud of locusts, absorbing tremendous casualties without slowing their advance. The outer defensive sphere collapsed within hours, with only a handful of Imperial vessels surviving to retreat to the second line. Here, the more concentrated firepower of the Imperial fleet inflicted significant damage on the Tyranid Hive ships, but at a terrible cost. By the time the remnants of the middle sphere fell back to Macragge's orbit, over 60% of the Imperial vessels had been destroyed. On Macragge itself, Kage directed the ground defense from the fortress of Hera, with the 1st, 3rd, and 7th Companies forming the core of his defensive force. The 2nd Company under Captain Sicarius defended the northern polar fortress, while the veteran 1st Company under Captain Sol Invictus occupied the southern polar defense complex, a critical installation housing the planet's main defense batteries and shield generators. The initial Tyranid landings concentrated on the fertile plains surrounding Macragge Civitas, where countless spore pods disgorged termagants, hormagaunts, and larger warrior organisms. The Ultramarines' 3rd Company, supported by Macragge Auxilia regiments, engaged these forces in a fighting retreat, yielding ground methodically while inflicting maximum casualties. Captain Artias employed mobile strike teams to target synapse creatures, temporarily disrupting the Tyranid coordination and creating opportunities for devastating artillery barrages against the confused lesser organisms. As the ground battle intensified, the Void War reached its climax. The remaining Imperial vessels formed a tight defensive formation around Macragge, their overlapping fields of fire creating a storm of ordnance that shredded the approaching bioships. In the midst of this desperate defense, Kage made a fateful decision. Taking personal command of the battle barge Octavius, he led a breakthrough strike against the largest Tyranid hive ship, identified by librarian Tigurius as the controlling node for a significant portion of the swarm. The assault nearly ended in disaster. Kage's strike force penetrated deep into the Tyranid formation, but found itself surrounded and cut off from retreat. The Octavius suffered catastrophic damage, with boarding tentacles breaching its hull in dozens of locations. Tyranid warrior organisms poured into the vessel, engaging the Ultramarines in brutal close-quarters combat throughout its corridors. Kage himself was grievously wounded by a Tyranid hive tyrant, losing all 4 limbs and suffering severe damage to his torso before his honor guard could extract him from the battlefield. Despite these injuries, Kage continued to direct the defense via neural interface from an apothecarian medici chamber. The remnants of his strike force managed to detonate the Octavius's warp engines after evacuating key personnel, creating a catastrophic disruption that destroyed the targeted hive ship and dozens of surrounding biovessels. This momentary confusion in the Tyranid assault provided a crucial respite for the defenders of Macragge, allowing reinforcement of critical positions and evacuation of wounded. The turning point came with the arrival of Battle Fleet Tempestus, a sizable Imperial Navy force that had responded to Kage's earlier astropathic calls for aid. Under the command of Lord Admiral Jellicoe, these fresh vessels struck the Tyranid fleet from an unexpected vector, catching the swarm between 2 Imperial forces. The coordinated firepower proved decisive, breaking the back of the Tyranid void presence and shifting the momentum of the entire conflict. With their orbital superiority compromised, the Tyranid ground forces lost their continuous reinforcement of spore pods and biomaterial. The Ultramarines capitalized on this advantage, launching counter-offensives against key Tyranid concentration points. The 3rd and 7th Companies, supported by Macragge Auxilia armored divisions, broke the siege of Macragge Civitas in a 3-day battle that left the plains around the city carpeted with Tyranid corpses. In the northern polar region, Captain Sicarius executed a brilliant defense that culminated in the collapse of a massive ice shelf onto advancing Tyranid forces, burying thousands of organisms under millions of tons of ice. His veterans then conducted a rapid assault against the exposed synapse creatures, decapitating the local Tyranid command structure and reducing their lesser organisms to uncoordinated beasts easily contained and eliminated. The southern polar defense complex faced the most severe test. The veteran 1st Company under Captain Invictus found itself besieged by the largest concentration of Tyranid organisms, including multiple hive tyrants and specialized tunnel beasts that breached the facility's outer defenses. For 6 days, the veterans held their positions against overwhelming odds, their Terminator armor allowing them to withstand the horrific biological weapons deployed by the Tyranids. When contact with the complex was finally lost, Kage dispatched the 3rd Company to reinforce the position, but they arrived too late. The entire 1st Company had fallen to the last man, their sacrifice buying time for the broader defense of Macragge to succeed. The battle for Macragge concluded with a series of coordinated strikes against the remaining Tyranid concentrations, systematically eliminating their synapse creatures and corralling the feral organisms that remained into containment zones where they could be destroyed in detail. The cost had been staggering, nearly 300 Ultramarines dead, including the entire First Company, thousands of naval personnel, and millions of civilians across Ultramar. Yet the outcome represented the first major Imperial victory against the Tyranids, providing crucial tactical data that would inform all subsequent conflicts with this Xenos threat. The aftermath of the First Tyrannic War saw significant changes in Ultramarine doctrine and organization. Chaplain Cassius established the Tyrannic War Veterans as a specialized cadre dedicated to developing anti-Tyranid tactics and disseminating this knowledge throughout the chapter. The lost First Company was gradually rebuilt, with veterans from other companies elevated to replace the fallen. Most significantly, the experience reinforced the Ultramarines' commitment to defending the realm of Ultramar as the bulwark of Imperial civilization in the Eastern Fringe. Decades before the Tyranid invasion, the Ultramarines faced a different challenge during the Badab War, a conflict that tested not their ability to defend against Xenos threats, but their commitment to Imperial unity. When Lugt Huron, chapter master of the Astral Claws, declared the independence of the Badab sector from Imperial taxation and oversight in the late 41st millennium, it triggered a succession crisis that would eventually draw in multiple Space Marine chapters and significant Imperial Navy assets. The Ultramarines initially maintained a watchful neutrality as the conflict escalated between Huron's forces and the chapters tasked with bringing him to compliance. However, when evidence emerged of the Astral Claws engaging in genetic experimentation and hoarding, geneseed in violation of their tithe obligations to Mars, Chapter Master Calgar determined that intervention was necessary. The Astral Claws' actions represented not merely political rebellion, but a fundamental breach of the traditions established by Guilliman in the Codex Astartes. Captain Severus Augeman led the Ultramarines contingent to the Badab conflict, commanding elements of the First and Second Companies, approximately 200 battle brothers supported by the strike cruisers Valens, Revenge, and Octavius. Their arrival in the war zone coincided with the discovery that Huron had begun calling his forces the Red Corsairs and openly embracing heretical practices, confirming the worst fears about his descent into treachery. The Ultramarines' participation proved decisive in several key engagements. During the Battle of Sagan, Augeman's forces secured the main shipyards against Red Corsair sabotage attempts, preserving crucial infrastructure that would later support the Imperial push into the heart of Huron's territory. At the Siege of Palace Shatterthorn, Ultramarine Terminators breached the defensive perimeter that had stymied other Imperial forces for weeks, creating an opening that allowed the Firehawks chapter to strike directly at the palace's command center. The most significant Ultramarine contribution came during the final assault on Badab Primaris itself. Captain Augeman identified a weakness in the planetary defense grid, a maintenance access point that had been incompletely secured during the Red Corsairs' hasty preparations. A strike team led by Chaplain Cassius infiltrated through this vulnerability and disabled critical power relays, creating a window in the void shields that allowed Imperial bombardment of key defensive positions. This action shortened the conflict by months and saved countless lives on both sides. When Huron was finally cornered in his fortress monastery, the Ultramarines participated in the final assault alongside the Star Phantoms and Marines Errant. The battle proved brutal, with the Red Corsairs fighting with the desperation of those who know no surrender is possible. Huron himself, now calling himself Blackheart and wielding warp-tainted weapons, engaged Augeman in single combat. The Ultramarine captain suffered severe injuries, but managed to land a critical blow that forced Huron to retreat. Though the traitor escaped with a small contingent of followers, his power in the Badab sector was broken completely. Few figures in the history of the Ultramarines embody the chapter's ideals as completely as Marnius Augustus Calgar. His tenure as chapter master has spanned over 4 centuries, guiding the Ultramarines through some of their most challenging trials since the Horus Heresy. Born on the mining world of Quintarn, Kagre's humble origins gave no indication of his future greatness. Selected during a routine recruitment cycle, he distinguished himself not through any single remarkable feat, but through consistent excellence across all trials. This pattern would define his entire career: steady, methodical competence rather than flashy heroism. Kagre's ascension to chapter master came following the death of his predecessor, Lord Macragge Gallatin, during the Corinthian Crusade. Taking command of a chapter still recovering from significant losses, Kagre implemented reforms that strengthened Ultramarine recruitment and training protocols while reinforcing their commitment to the defense of Ultramar. His leadership style combined strategic brilliance with a deep understanding of logistics and resource management, qualities that proved essential during the Tyrannic Wars. The most significant challenge of Kagre's tenure came during the First Tyrannic War, when Hive Fleet Behemoth descended upon Ultramar. His tactical decisions, including the painful choice to abandon outlying worlds to concentrate defenses around Macragge, ultimately saved the chapter's homeworld from consumption. During the Void Battle, Kagre personally led a desperate boarding action against the primary Tyranid Hive ship, suffering catastrophic injuries in the process. The chapter master lost all 4 limbs and sustained severe damage to his primary organs, requiring extensive bionic reconstruction. This near-death experience at the claws of the Swarmlord, the Tyranid's supreme synapse creature, became a defining moment in Kagre's life. The duel, which took place in the cavernous central chamber of the Hive ship, demonstrated both the limitations of even the greatest space marines when faced with the apex predators of the galaxy, and the indomitable will that defines the Ultramarines. Despite his grievous wounds, Kagre continued directing the defense of Macragge from his Medici chamber, refusing to relinquish command even as his body was systematically rebuilt with bionic replacements. The extensive augmentation that followed changed Kagre physically, but not spiritually. His new bionic limbs, crafted by the finest artificers of Mars, actually increased his combat capabilities, while his tactical acumen remained undiminished. Veterans of the chapter noted that the experience seemed to temper Kagre's occasional impetuousness, adding a layer of caution to his strategic thinking that would serve the Ultramarines well in subsequent conflicts. Centuries later, Kagre would undergo an even more profound transformation. When Roboute Guilliman returned to lead the Imperium as its Lord Commander during the Indomitus Crusade, he brought with him the fruits of Belisarius Cahl's millennia-long labor, the Primaris Space Marines. These enhanced Astartes, created through refinements to the Emperor's original work, represented the future of the Space Marine chapters. Recognizing this, Kagre made the momentous decision to undergo the Rubicon Primaris, the dangerous surgical procedure to transform a firstborn Marine into a Primaris. The process nearly claimed Kagre's life. For 72 hours, the chapter master lay suspended between life and death as Belisarius Cahl himself oversaw the procedure. His hearts were stopped and restarted multiple times as new organs were implanted, and his existing physiology was enhanced. When Kagre finally emerged from the surgical theater, he had become something new, the first chapter master to cross the Rubicon Primaris successfully, his already imposing form now towering even over veteran Astartes. This transformation symbolized Kagre's pragmatic leadership. Despite his centuries of service as a traditional space marine, he recognized the necessity of embracing the Primaris enhancements to better serve the chapter and the Imperium. This willingness to adapt while maintaining core principles reflects the Ultramarine philosophy that Kagre has embodied throughout his long service. While Kagre represents the martial and leadership ideals of the Ultramarines, Chief Librarian Varro Tugurius embodies their intellectual and spiritual dimensions. Considered the most powerful psyker in the chapter's history, Tugurius possesses abilities that approach those of the legendary librarians of the Great Crusade era. His psychic might manifests primarily through divination and telepathy, allowing him to perceive future probabilities and communicate across vast distances with remarkable clarity. Tugurius's background differs markedly from most Ultramarines. Born on Malbed, a world later consumed by Hive Fleet Kraken, he displayed powerful psychic abilities from childhood. When Ultramarine recruiters visited his world, these abilities initially caused concern rather than interest. Psykers were traditionally viewed with suspicion throughout the Imperium. However, Tigurius's exceptional control over his powers and unwavering mental discipline convinced the recruiters to accept him as an aspirant. During his training, Tigurius demonstrated not only tremendous psychic potential, but also remarkable tactical acumen and physical capability. He completed the transformation into a full Astartes with unusual ease, his body accepting the gene-seed implants without complication. Upon joining the Librarius, he advanced rapidly through its ranks, mastering disciplines that other battle brothers spent decades struggling to control. Tigurius's most controversial ability emerged during the Second Tyrannic War, when Hive Fleet Kraken threatened Ultramar. While other Psykers who attempted to comprehend the Tyranid hive mind suffered psychological collapse or worse, Tigurius claimed to have established a form of communion with the alien group consciousness. This unprecedented feat allowed him to anticipate Tyranid movements and strategies with uncanny accuracy, providing crucial intelligence that helped the Ultramarines counter the invasion. The nature of this communion remains disputed within the chapter and the broader Imperium. Some, including inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos, suspect dangerous corruption or Xenos influence. Others, particularly among the Librarius, believe Tigurius has simply developed unique mental shielding techniques that allow him to perceive the hive mind without being overwhelmed by it. Tigurius himself describes the experience as listening to a conversation in an adjoining room, perceiving patterns and intentions without directly engaging with the alien consciousness. This ability proved invaluable during the Battle of Tarsi's Ultra, where Tigurius predicted the exact landing zones of Tyranid mycetic spores 12 hours before they descended, allowing Ultramarine forces to prepare devastating ambushes. Similarly, during the defense of Espandor, his psychic foresight revealed a Tyranid tunneling offensive that would have bypassed the planet's primary defensive lines, giving Captain Agamemnon time to reinforce the threatened sector. Beyond his tactical contributions, Tigurius serves as keeper of the chapter's most ancient lore. His eidetic memory, enhanced by psychic techniques, allows him to recall with perfect clarity texts and teachings dating back to the Great Crusade. This knowledge makes him an invaluable advisor to Calgar, and following his return to Guilliman himself. The Primarch is said to value Tigurius's counsel particularly for his willingness to speak uncomfortable truths when others might remain silent out of deference. Tigurius's appearance reflects his exceptional status within the chapter. His psychic hood, an enhanced model crafted by Magos Cybus of Theralen, features additional crystalline focusing elements that help channel his tremendous powers. His force staff, known as the Rod of Tigurius, contains psycho-reactive materials that amplify his abilities while providing an outlet for excess psychic energy. Most distinctive is his armor, which bears countless purity seals and inscribed wards, necessary precautions given the intensity of his connection to the warp. Where Tigurius represents the Ultramarine psychic might, Chaplain Orton Cassius embodies their spiritual resilience and determination. As Master of Sanctity, Cassius oversees the chapter's religious observances and moral guidance, ensuring that every battle brother remains true to the ideals established by Guilliman 10 millennia ago. His influence extends throughout the chapter, from neophytes taking their first oaths to veterans preparing for their final battles. Cassius's appearance alone commands respect and even trepidation. His face bears extensive scarring from countless battles, with significant portions replaced by bionic augmentations following a near-fatal encounter with a Tyranid lictor during the battle for Macragge. His skull helmet, the traditional mark of the chaplaincy, has been modified with additional respirator components necessitated by damage to his lungs from Tyranid biotoxins. These injuries have left his voice with a distinctive metallic rasp that many battle brothers find particularly effective during pre-battle litanies. The chaplain's most significant contribution to the chapter came in the aftermath of the First Tyrannic War, when he recognized the existential threat posed by the Tyranids and the need for specialized tactics to counter them. Against considerable opposition from more traditionalist elements within the chapter, Cassius established the Tyrannic War Veterans, a cadre of battle brothers who had faced the Tyranids and survived, possessing invaluable first-hand experience against this alien menace. This initiative demonstrated Cassius's pragmatic approach to the chapter's spiritual traditions. While deeply respectful of the Codex Astartes, he argued successfully that Guilliman himself would have advocated adaptation to new threats. The tyrannic war veterans received specialized training, equipment modifications, and tactical indoctrination focused specifically on combating Tyranid organisms. Their armor features distinctive modifications, including enhanced respiratory filters to counter spore-based bioweapons and reinforced neck seals to protect against corrosive ichor. Under Cassius's leadership, the tyrannic war veterans developed into one of the Imperium's most effective anti-Tyranid forces. During the Zeist campaign, a detachment led by Cassius himself eliminated 3 hive tyrants in a single engagement, disrupting the Synapse control over an entire Tyranid splinter fleet. On Quintarn during the Third Tyrannic War, tyrannic war veterans held a critical mountain pass for 17 days against continuous Tyranid assaults, allowing civilian evacuation operations to complete successfully. Beyond his work with the tyrannic war veterans, Cassius serves as the chapter's moral compass, particularly regarding interactions with the broader Imperium. He frequently reminds battle brothers that their purpose extends beyond military victory to the protection of humanity itself. This perspective has proven especially valuable during complex operations involving Imperial civilians, where the Ultramarines' actions must balance tactical necessity with their duty to protect those they serve. While Calgar, Tigurius, and Cassius represent the chapter's senior leadership, Captain Uriel Ventress embodies both its future potential and the tensions inherent in balancing tradition with necessary innovation. As commander of the 4th Company, Ventress has compiled a service record marked by both brilliant successes and controversial decisions that have tested the chapter's tolerance for unorthodox approaches. Ventress's career began conventionally enough, rising through the ranks of the 4th Company under the mentorship of Captain Idius. Following his predecessor's death during the Thrama's Crusade, Ventress assumed command and quickly demonstrated both tactical acumen and a willingness to interpret the Codex Astartes more flexibly than many of his peers. This approach yielded impressive victories, including the liberation of Cairnews IV from Dark Eldar raiders through an innovative application of drop pod assault patterns not explicitly outlined in the Codex. The defining moment in Ventress's career came during the Tarsi's Ultra campaign against Hive Fleet Leviathan. Facing a Tyranid invasion that threatened to overwhelm Imperial defenses, Ventress made the controversial decision to lead a small kill team into the heart of the primary Hive ship to assassinate its Norn Queen. This mission, while ultimately successful in stopping the invasion, violated Codex doctrine regarding command officers abandoning their primary units and the proper deployment of Astartes forces. For this breach of chapter tradition, Ventress and his companion Sergeant Pausanias were sentenced to the death oath, a penitent quest into the realm of the Tyranids' ancient enemies, the Necrons. Their mission to destroy a Necron installation on the world of Pavanus would test both their combat skills and their loyalty to the chapter that had cast them out. For nearly 5 years, they fought through unimaginable horrors, including encounters with the forces of chaos and previously unknown Xeno species. Ventress's eventual return and redemption demonstrated the Ultramarines' capacity for recognizing value in experiences outside Codex parameters. Rather than rejecting the insights gained during his exile, the chapter incorporated them into its tactical doctrines, particularly regarding Necron weaknesses and Chaos Space Marine strategies. Ventress himself returned to command of the 4th Company, his unorthodox perspective now valued as a complement to more traditional approaches. This rehabilitation reflected a broader shift within the Ultramarines following the return of Guilliman. The Primarch himself noted that many chapters had come to treat the Codex Astartes as dogma rather than the flexible framework he had intended. Ventress's career embodied this tension between adherence to tradition and necessary adaptation, a balance that would prove increasingly important as the Imperium faced unprecedented threats during the era Indomitus. Ventress's physical appearance reflects his unique experiences. Unlike many Ultramarines officers who display their honors prominently, his armor bears relatively few decorations, with the most notable being the skull and starburst emblem of the tyrannic war veterans. The captain's face shows the weathering of his unusual service, with a prominent scar running from his left temple to jawline, a reminder of his duel with the Tyrannid Hive tyrant on Tarsi's Ultra. His primary weapon, the Sword of Ideas, connects him to his mentor and predecessor, while symbolizing the continuity of leadership despite his unconventional path. The stillness of the Shrine of Guilliman had remained undisturbed for 10,000 years. Within the Temple of Correction on Macragge, the Primarch's body lay in stasis, preserved at the moment of death after his fateful duel with Fulgrim. Generations of pilgrims had come to gaze upon his noble features, frozen in time behind the stasis field's shimmering barrier. None suspected that this sanctuary would become the stage for one of the most momentous events in Imperial history. The sequence of events that led to Guilliman's resurrection began far from Macragge, in the labyrinthine workshops of Archmago's Dominus Belisarius Call. For nearly 10 millennia, this brilliant and unorthodox tech priest had worked on technologies that would transform the Imperium's defenders. Operating under secretive instructions allegedly received from Guilliman himself before his interment, Call had developed enhancements to the Astartes creation process, producing what would later be known as Primaris Space Marines. As the 41st millennium drew to a close, these parallel strands of fate converged. The gathering storm swept across the galaxy as the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon, the Despoiler, gained momentum. Cadia, the stalwart bastion that had held back the forces of chaos for millennia, finally fell. The Cicatrix Maledictum, a vast warp rift, began to form, threatening to split the Imperium in two. It was against this backdrop of escalating crisis that an unlikely alliance formed. Archmago's Call arrived at Macragge with a massive Arc Mechanicus vessel containing his life's work. Accompanying him was Ivrain, the Inari priestess and emissary of the recently awakened Eldari god of death, Ennead. This cooperation between Imperial and Eldari forces would once have been unthinkable, but desperation made strange bedfellows. The Ultramarines, led by Chapter Master Marnius Calgar, initially regarded these visitors with deep suspicion. Call's reputation for technological heterodoxy made him mistrusted by many within the Mechanicus, while the Eldari had been enemies of mankind since the Imperium's founding. Yet the gravity of the situation, and the tantalizing possibility that Ivrain's unique powers might accomplish what had previously been impossible, led Calgar to grant them access to the shrine. The Terran crusade that brought these disparate forces together had been fraught with peril. Call's vessel, the Zarquisitor, had navigated treacherous warp routes to reach Macragge, fighting through chaos ambushes and surviving passage through regions where reality itself had begun to fray. Ivrain and her Inari followers had undertaken an equally dangerous journey, pursued by agents of Slaanesh who sought to prevent their mission. Within the hushed confines of the shrine, surrounded by the most elite warriors of the Ultramarines chapter, Call and Ivrain enacted their desperate gambit. The stasis field that had preserved Guilliman's body was deactivated, a process requiring hours of careful calibration to prevent catastrophic failure. As the field collapsed, the poison that had nearly killed the Primarch 10 millennia ago resumed its work, threatening to complete what Fulgrim had begun. It was at this critical moment that Ivrain employed the power of Ennead, using the god of death's gifts to purge the chaos toxins from Guilliman's system. Simultaneously, Call activated the Armor of Fate, a masterwork of technological artifice that he had spent centuries perfecting. This combination of Eldari mysticism and Mechanicus technology accomplished what neither could have achieved alone. Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, opened his eyes for the first time in 10,000 years. The Primarch's awakening was not the serene moment of triumph many might have imagined. Guilliman erupted from his stasis throne in confusion and rage, his last memories being of his brother Fulgrim's betrayal. Within moments, he had assessed the situation in the shrine and taken command, his transhuman intellect processing and adapting to his surroundings with incredible speed. The timing proved fortunate, as a Black Legion strike force, led by the sorcerer Kairos Fateweaver, chose that moment to launch an assault on the Temple of Correction. Whether through prophetic foresight or treachery within the Ultramarines' ranks, the forces of chaos had learned of the attempt to revive Guilliman and sought to ensure his resurrection would be short-lived. Guilliman's first battle in his new existence was fought within the sacred precincts of his own shrine. Wielding the Emperor's sword, a massive blade of incredible power that had been kept alongside his body, the Primarch demonstrated that 10 millennia of stasis had not dulled his martial prowess. Black Legion Terminators and Demon Engines fell before him as he carved a path through the attackers, his tactical genius evident in how quickly he adapted to the weapons and capabilities of enemies that had not existed during the Great Crusade. With the immediate threat repelled, Guilliman faced a more profound challenge, understanding the Imperium he had awakened to. The briefings he received from Kage and other Ultramarines leaders painted a grim picture. The Emperor, entombed in the Golden Throne for 10 millennia, was worshipped as a god despite the imperial truth that Guilliman had once championed. The Imperium had devolved into a stagnant, superstitious shadow of what he and his father had envisioned, beset by enemies on all sides and rotting from within. Guilliman's private reaction to this information was one of profound grief and anger. In his personal writings, later collected in the Codex Imperialis, he described the sensation as a wound deeper than any blade could inflict. The secular empire of reason and progress that he had fought to build had transformed into a theocratic regime where technological innovation was feared and human potential was sacrificed to feed the inexhaustible demands of endless war. Most disturbing to the Primarch was the imperial cult that had grown around his father's memory. The Emperor had explicitly rejected divinity, yet now was worshipped by trillions across the galaxy. Guilliman himself had been canonized as one of the God Emperor's most holy sons, with elaborate rituals and prayers dedicated to his memory. The irony that these same devotees now looked to him for leadership was not lost on the Primarch. Despite his personal revulsion at what the Imperium had become, Guilliman recognized the practical necessity of working within the existing framework. In public, he carefully avoided directly challenging imperial religious practices, understanding that faith had become one of the few forces holding humanity together in a galaxy overrun by nightmares. His pragmatism extended to his dealings with the Adeptus Mechanicus, Adeptus Ministorum, and other imperial institutions that had diverged from his original vision. After securing Macragge and assessing the broader strategic situation, Guilliman made his momentous decision to travel to Terra. This journey, which would become known as the Terran Crusade, represented both a practical necessity and a symbolic pilgrimage. The Primarch needed to consult with his father, if such communication was still possible, and to establish his authority within the fractured imperial hierarchy. The Crusade faced immediate challenges. The formation of the Cicatrix Maledictum had made warp travel increasingly dangerous, with navigator houses reporting unprecedented levels of turbulence and predatory entities in the Imperium. Guilliman's fleet, comprising vessels from the Ultramarines and several successor chapters who had pledged their support, found traditional warp routes blocked or corrupted. This difficulty was compounded by constant harassment from Chaos forces. The Thousand Sons, led by agents of Magnus the Red, seemed particularly determined to prevent Guilliman from reaching Terra. Their attacks focused on corrupting the navigators guiding the Imperial fleet, resulting in several disastrous translation incidents that cost the Crusade valuable ships and warriors. The most severe setback came when the Crusade was trapped within the Maelstrom, a massive warp storm that had existed since before the Horus Heresy. Ambushed by a Red Corsairs fleet led by Huron Blackheart, Guilliman's forces were scattered and driven into the storm's depths. The Primarch himself was captured through a combination of technological treachery and warp sorcery, his new armor systems temporarily compromised. Guilliman's imprisonment by Kairos Fateweaver within the Maelstrom represented the darkest moment of the Crusade. The Lord of Change, a greater demon of Tzeentch, subjected the Primarch to elaborate psychological torments, showing him visions of possible futures where his efforts to save the Imperium only hastened its collapse. These psychic assaults tested Guilliman's resolve in ways that physical combat never could, probing for weaknesses in his conviction. Salvation came from an unexpected quarter. The Eldari Farseer Eldred Ulthrin, working through Ivrain and the Inari, orchestrated a daring rescue operation. Recognizing that Guilliman's return represented perhaps the only hope for both human and Eldari survival against the rising tide of chaos, Eldred committed significant resources to freeing the Primarch, including the deployment of several Craftworld Warhost assets that had previously refused to cooperate with the Inari. The escape from the Maelstrom was hard-fought, with significant casualties among the Loyalist forces. The sacrifice of the strike cruiser Emperor's Will, which deliberately collided with a Red Corsair's battle barge to create an escape corridor, exemplified the desperate measures required. Guilliman honored the vessel's crew in his later writings, noting that such selfless courage demonstrates that despite 10 millennia of corruption and decay, the true spirit of the Imperium survives in the hearts of its defenders. When Guilliman finally reached Terra, he found a world transformed from the seat of enlightened governance he remembered. The Imperial Palace had become a continent-spanning fortress monastery, its original architectural elegance buried beneath layer upon layer of defensive emplacements and Gothic embellishments. Billions of pilgrims crowded the approaches to the palace, many having waited decades for the chance to come within sight of its walls. The Primarch's reception by the High Lords of Terra reflected the complex political reality of the Imperium. While none dared openly oppose a living son of the Emperor, many harbored deep concerns about how Guilliman's return would affect their power and privileges. The Fabricator General of Mars questioned the provenance of Guilliman's new armor. The Ecclesiarch worried about the theological implications of a Primarch who had known the Emperor as a man rather than a god. The Grand Master of Assassins remained conspicuously silent throughout the initial audiences. Cutting through these political maneuvers, Guilliman demanded a private audience with the Emperor. What transpired in the Sanctum Imperialis before the Golden Throne remains known only to the Primarch himself. Guards outside the chamber reported a golden light that grew in intensity throughout the meeting, and tech priests monitoring the throne's life support systems noted fluctuations in energy patterns unlike anything recorded in thousands of years of observation. When Guilliman emerged, his demeanor had subtly changed. Those closest to him, particularly Call and certain Ultramarines veterans who had known him during the Great Crusade, observed a new resolve in his bearing. In his first address to the High Lords following this audience, Guilliman announced his assumption of the title Lord Commander of the Imperium, the same position he had held during the dark days after the Horus Heresy, and declared the beginning of the Indomitus Crusade to push back the forces of chaos. This declaration was accompanied by the unveiling of Call's secret work, the Primaris Space Marines. These enhanced Astartes, developed from Guilliman's genetic template and incorporating numerous biological and technological improvements, represented a new generation of transhuman warriors. Their introduction sent shockwaves through the existing Space Marine chapters, many of whom initially viewed these newcomers with suspicion or outright hostility. Guilliman's approach to integrating the Primaris Marines demonstrated his political acumen. Rather than replacing existing chapter structures, he presented the Primaris as reinforcements, a timely influx of fresh warriors when many chapters had been depleted by constant warfare. He also ensured that the first Primaris units deployed to existing chapters were created from that chapter's own gene seed, maintaining the spiritual lineage that was so important to Astartes' culture. For the Ultramarines specifically, Guilliman's return meant significant changes to both chapter organization and the governance of Ultramar. The Primarch expressed dismay at how the once mighty realm of 500 worlds had contracted to a mere handful of systems directly surrounding Macragge. One of his first edicts was the restoration of Ultramar's historical borders, reclaiming worlds that had once been part of his domain, but had drifted into independence or fallen under other authorities during his absence. This territorial expansion was accompanied by administrative reforms that reflected Guilliman's original vision for Ultramar. He reinstated the Tetrarchy, 4 lords assigned to govern different quadrants of Ultramar, appointing both veteran Ultramarines officers and newly elevated Primaris Marines to these positions. This balanced approach helped integrate the new Primaris warriors into the chapter's command structure, while acknowledging the experience and loyalty of existing officers. The military organization of the Ultramarines also evolved under Guilliman's direct oversight. While maintaining the basic structure outlined in the Codex Astartes, the Primarch authorized several adaptations to address the strategic realities of the 42nd millennium. The tyrannic war veterans, formed in response to the Hive Fleet invasions, received his official sanction. New formations like the Victrix Guard, an elite unit combining elements of the traditional honor guard with Primaris warriors, emerged to address specific tactical needs. Perhaps most significantly, Guilliman clarified his original intentions regarding the Codex Astartes. In a chapter address that was subsequently distributed to all Ultramarine successors, he emphasized that the Codex was meant to be a flexible framework rather than an immutable scripture. "I wrote the Codex to guide, not to constrain," he stated. "A warrior who cannot adapt his tactics to changing circumstances is doomed to defeat, regardless of how faithfully he follows written doctrine." This clarification resolved long-standing tensions within the Ultramarines and their successors regarding proper interpretation of the Codex. Captains who had previously been criticized for tactical innovations, such as Uriel Ventris of the 4th Company, found their approaches vindicated by the Primarch himself. The resulting doctrinal flexibility, combined with the influx of Primaris reinforcements, significantly enhanced the Ultramarines' combat effectiveness during the campaigns that followed. The integration of Primaris Space Marines into the Ultramarines began not as a single event, but as a carefully orchestrated process overseen by Guilliman himself. Following his resurrection and the launch of the Indomitus Crusade, the Primarch recognized that simply depositing these enhanced warriors into existing chapter structures would create friction and potentially undermine unit cohesion. Instead, he developed a phased integration plan that would gradually blend the traditional Astartes and their Primaris counterparts into a unified fighting force. The first Primaris Ultramarines arrived on Crag aboard the Crags on her following Guilliman's return from Terra. These warriors, drawn from the original Terran stock and created directly from the Primarch's gene line, had spent centuries in stasis while Belisarius Cawl perfected their enhancements. Despite their technical designation as Ultramarines, they had never set foot on Crag, never drunk from the waters of Lake Calais, never trained in the Aegisless barracks. They were Ultramarines by blood, but not by experience or culture. Captain Felix, appointed by Guilliman as equerry and designated leader of these first Primaris formations, understood the challenge this presented. A thoughtful and diplomatic officer, Felix established a measured approach to integration, beginning with small joint training exercises rather than immediate battlefield deployment. These controlled environments allowed traditional Astartes to observe Primaris capabilities firsthand, while giving the newcomers opportunity to learn Ultramarines' tactical doctrines and cultural practices. The training grounds of the Fortress of Hera became the proving grounds for this new partnership. Traditional Ultramarines initially approached their Primaris counterparts with professional courtesy masking underlying skepticism. Veterans who had survived centuries of warfare, including the horrors of the tyrannic wars, questioned whether these untested warriors, regardless of their physical enhancements, truly understood what it meant to be sons of Guilliman. Sergeant Cronus, the renowned tank commander of the 2nd Company, exemplified this cautious approach. During early joint exercises, he deliberately challenged Primaris squads with complex tactical problems that required intimate knowledge of Codex doctrines. When Lieutenant Akron's Intercessor Squad successfully adapted standard protocols to overcome these challenges, Cronus acknowledged their tactical acumen with grudging respect. This small moment, recorded in the chapter's training logs, marked the beginning of genuine acceptance. The physical differences between traditional Astartes and their Primaris counterparts created both practical and psychological barriers to integration. Primaris Marines stood approximately half a head taller than their brethren, with proportionally greater muscle mass and bone density. Their enhanced organs, particularly the sinew coils and magnificat, granted them superior strength and endurance. These advantages, while tactically beneficial, created an unspoken hierarchy that threatened unit cohesion. Captain Guilliman, master of the 1st Company and regent of Ultramar, addressed this issue directly during a company commander's conclave. "The measure of an Ultramarine," he stated, "has never been his physical stature, but his adherence to the principles laid down by our Primarch." A warrior who stands tall in body but falls short in discipline, tactical acumen, or brotherhood has failed to grasp what truly matters. This perspective, coming from a respected veteran who had served as chapter champion before his elevation to first captain, helped establish merit rather than origin as the basis for advancement within the chapter. The operational integration of Primaris Marines accelerated following the Battle of Rhokkos, which marked the official conclusion of the Indomitus Crusade. With the immediate chaos threat contained, Guilliman directed more attention to reorganizing his home chapter. Traditional company structures were maintained, but with significant additions of Primaris units to fill gaps created by combat losses during the Crusade. The second company under Captain Sicarius became the test case for this integrated approach. Sicarius, recently recovered from grievous wounds sustained during the Crusade, approached the challenge with characteristic intensity. Rather than maintaining separate Primaris and traditional squads, he implemented mixed unit tactics that combined the strengths of different warrior types. Intercessor squads provided enhanced ranged firepower and durability, while tactical Marines contributed tactical flexibility and experience. Aggressors and Inceptors were paired with Assault Marines to create multi-layered assault formations capable of addressing varied enemy types. This integration was not without friction. During the Connor campaign against Death Guard forces, miscommunication between Lieutenant Tigullan's Primaris detachment and veteran Sergeant Vorlanis's tactical squad resulted in a failed pincer movement that nearly cost the company a strategic objective. In the operation's aftermath, Sicarius required both officers to develop joint training protocols specifically addressing command and control procedures for mixed units. These protocols were later standardized across the chapter, forming the basis for what would become known as the Codex Primaris Supplement. The technological disparities between traditional and Primaris equipment created logistical challenges that further complicated integration. Master of the Forge Fenia's Maxim established dedicated maintenance facilities for Mark X armor variants and Primaris weaponry, with cross-training programs to ensure all Techmarines could service both traditional and new equipment. The bolt rifle, with its enhanced range and stopping power, gradually replaced the standard bolter as the chapter's primary infantry weapon, though many veterans continued to prefer their proven armaments for specific tactical applications. Chaplain Cassius, whose skepticism of the Primaris Marines was initially among the most pronounced, found unexpected common ground with them through spiritual guidance. The Primaris warriors, having awakened in an unfamiliar millennium, experienced a form of cultural displacement that Cassius recognized from his work with battle brothers suffering combat trauma. His ministry expanded to address their unique spiritual needs, helping them connect with Ultramarines' traditions while acknowledging their distinct experiences. This pastoral approach, focusing on shared values rather than differences, proved more effective than formal integration protocols at building genuine brotherhood between the two groups. Chief Librarian Tigurius approached the Primaris Marines with scholarly interest rather than suspicion. The psychic potential among these new warriors appeared to manifest differently than in traditional Astartes, with more consistent but sometimes less powerful expressions. Tigurius personally evaluated each Primaris psyker assigned to the Librarius, developing specialized training techniques to accommodate their unique mental architecture. His research, compiled in the treatise Comparative Psychic Manifestations in Enhanced Astartes Physiology, became standard reference material for librarians throughout Ultramar and beyond. The formation of entirely new companies represented another dimension of Primaris integration. As the Indomitus Crusade concluded and more Primaris reinforcements became available, Guilliman authorized the creation of the 11th through 20th companies, a significant expansion beyond traditional codex parameters. These new formations, composed entirely of Primaris Marines, allowed for preservation of traditional company structures while accommodating the influx of enhanced warriors. Captain Akron, elevated from his lieutenant position, took command of the 11th Company, while other Primaris officers who had distinguished themselves during the Crusade received similar promotions. This expansion necessitated recruitment on an unprecedented scale. The traditional sources on Macragge and surrounding worlds could not produce enough aspirants to fill 20 companies, particularly given the higher physical standards required for Primaris creation. Apothecary Polonius established new recruitment centers on previously untapped worlds throughout Ultramar, implementing standardized testing protocols to identify candidates with suitable genetic profiles. The 500 worlds, gradually being reclaimed under Guilliman's directive, provided a vastly expanded recruitment pool that helped sustain the chapter's growth. The Primaris creation process itself underwent significant modification under Belisarius Call's guidance. The original Primaris Marines had required centuries of development, with extensive gene crafting and hypno-indoctrination during their stasis period. The new generation underwent an accelerated process that compressed this timeline into approximately a decade, still longer than traditional Astartes creation, but feasible for maintaining chapter strength. This modified approach produced warriors who, while fully Primaris in physical capability, had not experienced the same extended conditioning as the original cohort. This distinction created a generational divide within the Primaris ranks themselves. The Awakened, those who had been created during the original project and spent millennia in stasis, possessed a direct connection to the Great Crusade era through their hypno-indoctrination. The Ascended, traditional Astartes who had crossed the Rubicon Primaris to become Primaris Marines, carried centuries of lived experience within the chapter. The Newborn, those created after Guilliman's return, lacked both these perspectives, instead bringing fresh viewpoints unconstrained by either ancient conditioning or established tradition. Captain Epathus of the 4th Company, himself an awakened Primaris, recognized the value in these different perspectives. He established mentorship triads within his company, deliberately grouping warriors from each category together for joint operations and training. This approach fostered knowledge transfer while building personal bonds that transcended origin. The practice spread throughout the chapter, eventually becoming standard procedure for integrating new Primaris recruits as they completed their transformation and training. The battlefield effectiveness of Primaris Marines became undeniable during the Plague Wars that ravaged Ultramar following the Indomitus Crusade. Against Death Guard forces on Parmenio, aggressor squads demonstrated remarkable resilience to biological weapons that had previously caused significant casualties among traditional Astartes. The enhanced respiratory system of the Primaris physiology provided superior protection against airborne pathogens, while their reinforced organ systems showed greater resistance to Nurgle's corruption. This biological resilience proved particularly valuable during the liberation of Connor, where Death Guard forces had saturated key strategic positions with virulent plague spores. Lieutenant Corvo's Primaris strike force secured the primary water treatment facility on Connor's southern continent, operating in a contamination zone that would have required extensive protective equipment for traditional Astartes. Their enhanced physiology allowed for more rapid deployment and greater tactical flexibility, contributing significantly to the operation's success. The Hellblaster squads, with their plasma incinerators, provided unprecedented anti-armor capability at the infantry level. During the Battle of Drenthal, a single Hellblaster squad under Sergeant Maxentius destroyed 7 Death Guard Plague Burst crawlers in rapid succession, breaking the back of an enemy offensive that threatened to overwhelm the Imperial defensive line. This firepower, combined with the durability of Mark X armor, allowed Primaris infantry to engage threats that would previously have required dedicated heavy support. Inceptor squads added a new dimension to Ultramarine assault doctrine. Their jump pack technology, more advanced than traditional designs, allowed for precision deep strikes with heavier weaponry than conventional assault marines could deploy. Captain Akron pioneered the Descending Thunder tactic, combining Inceptor drops with repulsor tank advances to create synchronized multi-level attacks that overwhelmed enemy defensive positions through simultaneous pressure at different elevations. The repulsor tank itself represented a significant advancement in Astartes armored warfare. Its gravitic plates allowed it to hover over difficult terrain that would bog down traditional tracked vehicles, while its enhanced weapons loadout combined anti-infantry and anti-armor capabilities in a single platform. Sergeant Cronus, after initial skepticism, became one of the most vocal advocates for the repulsor after witnessing its performance during the Lorgath Plateau engagement, where its mobility allowed Ultramarine forces to outflank and encircle a numerically superior Plague Marine force. The new equipment and enhanced capabilities of Primaris formations necessitated revisions to established tactical doctrines. Captain Guilliman established a doctrine review board comprising veterans from both traditional and Primaris backgrounds, tasked with systematically evaluating Codex tactics in light of new capabilities. This methodical approach reflected the Ultramarines' commitment to evidence-based doctrine development rather than tradition for its own sake. The review board's findings led to significant adaptations in standard combat protocols. The increased range of bolt rifles allowed for more dispersed firing lines, reducing vulnerability to area effect weapons while maintaining effective firepower. The enhanced communications suite in Mark X helmets facilitated more complex coordination between separated units, enabling new variants of classic maneuvers like the theoretical retreat and codex pincer. The superior durability of Primaris physiology permitted more aggressive shock assault tactics that had previously carried unacceptable casualty risks. These tactical innovations were compiled in a comprehensive supplement to the Codex Astartes, authored jointly by Captains Guilliman and Felix. The supplement, officially titled Adaptive Implementations of Codex Doctrine for Enhanced Astartes Deployments, but commonly known as the Primaris Protocols, provided standardized guidance for integrating new capabilities into established tactical frameworks. Guilliman personally reviewed and approved this work, noting that it exemplified the spirit of continuous improvement he had intended when creating the original codex. The strategic implications of Primaris technology extended beyond tactical adaptations to fundamentally alter the Ultramarines' operational capabilities. The increased resilience and combat effectiveness of Primaris formations allowed for more aggressive force projection with smaller detachments. Captain Epathus demonstrated this advantage during the Damno's reclamation, where his company operated independently across 3 separate war zones simultaneously, a dispersion that would have created unacceptable vulnerability with traditional forces. The foundation of Ultramarine identity rests not merely on tactical doctrine or battlefield prowess, but on a comprehensive philosophical framework established by Roboute Guilliman and refined over 10 millennia of service. At its core lies a concept often misunderstood by outsiders: the balance between pragmatic efficiency and unwavering idealism that defines the Sons of Guilliman's approach to their duties. This balance manifests most visibly in the principle of theoretical and practical thinking that permeates every aspect of Ultramarine training and operations. Far more than a simple tactical methodology, this approach represents a fundamental worldview that shapes how Ultramarines perceive their role within the Imperium. The theoretical encompasses comprehensive analysis of all available information, consideration of potential outcomes, and development of optimal response strategies. The practical involves the disciplined implementation of these strategies, adapted as necessary to address evolving circumstances. Sergeant Eonid Thiel, whose unconventional thinking earned him both censure and eventual recognition during the Horus Heresy, described this process in notes preserved in the chapter's archives. The theoretical prepares the mind, the practical tests its preparation. Neither alone suffices. A warrior who acts without thought becomes a mere weapon to be pointed by others. A warrior who thinks without action becomes a mere scholar, impotent in the face of reality. This methodical approach extends beyond warfare into all aspects of Ultramarine culture. When facing ethical dilemmas, battle brothers are taught to establish a theoretical framework based on chapter values, historical precedents, and projected consequences before determining practical actions. This process prevents both impulsive reactions and paralysis through over-analysis, twin dangers that Guilliman, identified as particularly threatening to transhuman warriors, whose enhanced capabilities can magnify the consequences of either error. The application of theoretical practical thinking appears in daily chapter rituals. Each morning begins with the reflection hour, during which Ultramarines contemplate their previous day's actions, identifying decisions that produced optimal outcomes and those that require refinement. This practice, established by Guilliman himself during the Great Crusade, develops the habit of continuous improvement that characterizes the chapter's approach to all endeavors. Veteran Sergeant Mikkel Fabian of the 3rd Company described the psychological impact of this practice in his instructional text for neophytes. The reflection hour grounds us in humility while strengthening our resolve. We acknowledge our imperfections without being diminished by them. We recognize our successes without being blinded by pride. Through daily reflection, we forge ourselves into more effective instruments of the Emperor's will. The philosophical underpinnings of Ultramarine culture emphasize the concept of duty as reasoned service rather than blind obedience. While absolute loyalty to the Emperor and Primarch remains unquestioned, Guilliman established a tradition of understanding the purpose behind commands rather than following them unthinkingly. This approach produces warriors who can operate effectively even when cut off from the command structure, adapting their actions to fulfill the intent behind their orders rather than adhering rigidly to potentially outdated directives. Captain Uriel Ventris articulated this principle during his address to newly promoted sergeants. An Ultramarine serves most faithfully when he understands not just what he must do, but why he must do it. The Codex provides guidance, but circumstances provide context. When these conflict, understanding the underlying purpose allows us to resolve the contradiction without compromising our duty. This emphasis on reasoned service connects directly to the chapter's view of honor. Unlike some chapters that define honor primarily through individual martial prowess or death-seeking valor, the Ultramarines conceptualize honor as faithful execution of duty in service to humanity. The greatest honor lies not in glorious death, but in effective preservation of imperial lives and territory. This pragmatic perspective sometimes earns derision from chapters like the Space Wolves or Blood Angels, who mistake the Ultramarines' methodical approach for lack of warrior spirit. The chapter's understanding of honor manifests in its recognition ceremonies. Rather than celebrating only spectacular individual achievements, Ultramarine commendation rituals acknowledge actions that exemplify the chapter's core values. The Laurel of Tactical Excellence, one of the chapter's highest honors, has been awarded to battle brothers who orchestrated successful retreats that preserved irreplaceable forces, alongside those who achieved remarkable victories. This balanced perspective reinforces the principle that an Ultramarine's value lies in his contribution to the chapter's overall effectiveness, not merely his personal battle record. The ceremony of the honorific, conducted quarterly within each company, exemplifies this philosophy. During this ritual, battle brothers nominate comrades who have demonstrated exceptional adherence to chapter values, regardless of rank or battlefield role. Techmarines maintaining critical equipment, apothecaries preserving gene seed under fire, or line battle brothers executing perfect tactical maneuvers all receive equal consideration. The captain then selects recipients for formal recognition, with each honorific accompanied by a specific explanation of how the recognized action embodied Ultramarine principles. The cultural identity of the Ultramarines finds further expression through the chapter's distinctive traditions surrounding knowledge acquisition and preservation. Unlike some chapters that primarily value combat experience, the Ultramarines maintain extensive scholarly traditions that complement their martial training. The Library of Ptolemy within the Fortress of Hera houses one of the most comprehensive collections of tactical treatises, historical records, and philosophical works outside the Imperial Palace itself. All Ultramarines, regardless of specialization, participate in ongoing scholarly development throughout their service. Junior battle brothers are assigned research projects analyzing historical campaigns relevant to current deployments. Squad sergeants produce tactical assessments of their operations for addition to the chapter archives. company captains author comprehensive treatises on specialized aspects of warfare drawn from their experience. This continuous documentation creates an ever-expanding body of knowledge that allows each generation of Ultramarines to build upon the insights of their predecessors rather than relearning lessons through costly experience. The chapter's emphasis on knowledge extends to understanding potential adversaries. The Xenobiologist Vault contains detailed analyses of every xeno species encountered by the Ultramarines throughout their history, from comprehensive tactical doctrine for major threats like orcs and tyranids, to fragmentary observations of obscure species encountered during isolated campaigns. This repository, continuously updated as new information becomes available, allows Ultramarine forces to deploy with detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities and vulnerabilities, rather than learning through costly trial and error. The practical value of this scholarly tradition became evident during the Tyrannic Wars. When Hive Fleet Behemoth first attacked Ultramar, the chapter faced an entirely unknown enemy with biological capabilities that defied conventional tactical responses. Following the devastating battle for Crag, surviving officers systematically compiled all observations of tyrannid organisms, creating a comprehensive classification system and identifying effective countermeasures for each bioform. This analytical approach transformed the tyrannids from an incomprehensible horror to a cataloged threat with known parameters, significantly improving Imperial response effectiveness in subsequent encounters. Beyond formal scholarship, Ultramarine culture emphasizes mentorship as a means of knowledge transmission. The bond of instruction pairs veteran battle brothers with junior Marines for personalized guidance that extends beyond standard training protocols. These relationships, which often span decades, allow for transmission of nuanced tactical insights and philosophical perspectives that cannot be adequately conveyed through formal documentation. The veteran gains fresh perspective from his protege's questions, while the junior Marine benefits from centuries of accumulated wisdom, creating a continuous cycle of refinement that prevents doctrinal stagnation. The chapter's ceremonial practices reflect its dual identity as both a military organization and a cultural institution. The Feast of Remembrance, held annually on the anniversary of Guilliman's original interment, exemplifies this balance. The ceremony begins with solemn recitation of the names of battle brothers who fell during the previous year, acknowledging the sacrifice that underpins the chapter's continued existence. This somber recognition transitions into a celebration of Ultramar's cultural achievements, with presentations of art, music, and scholarly works created by citizens throughout the realm. This integration of martial and civilian cultural elements reflects Guilliman's vision of Space Marines as defenders of humanity in its fullest sense, preserving not merely human lives but human civilization. Ultramarines attend the ceremony in formal dress rather than battle plate, symbolically setting aside their warrior aspect to participate as members of the society they protect. Chapter serfs and civilian representatives from throughout Ultramar attend as honored guests rather than subordinates, reinforcing the principle that Astartes serve humanity rather than ruling it. The chapter's approach to recruitment further demonstrates this philosophical orientation. Unlike chapters that select aspirants through death matches or extreme survival trials that test only physical prowess and aggression, Ultramarine recruitment evaluates candidates across multiple dimensions. Physical capability remains essential, but equal emphasis is placed on intellectual capacity, ethical reasoning, and psychological stability. Aspirants face challenges designed to test their decision-making under pressure, ability to balance competing priorities, and commitment to protecting civilians even at personal cost. The trial of judgment presents candidates with complex ethical scenarios drawn from actual chapter history, requiring them to make decisions with incomplete information and conflicting obligations. The trial of knowledge tests not merely memorization but analytical capability, requiring aspirants to solve novel problems by applying fundamental principles rather than following established templates. These comprehensive evaluation methods produce warriors who embody the complete Ultramarine ethos rather than merely possessing combat potential. This holistic development continues throughout an Ultramarine service. The chapter's training regimen includes regular rotation through non-combat roles, ensuring that every battle brother gains perspective on all aspects of chapter operations. A typical Ultramarine might serve periods assisting the apothecarian in screening potential recruits, supporting the librarius in cataloging tactical data, or working with chapter serfs to maintain the fortress of Hera's infrastructure. This practice prevents the narrowing of perspective that can occur when warriors focus exclusively on combat operations, maintaining the balanced outlook that defines Ultramarine culture. The philosophical foundation established by Guilliman has proven remarkably durable across 10 millennia, adapting to changing circumstances without losing its essential character. When faced with unprecedented threats like the Tyranids or the Cicatrix Maledictum, the chapter has modified specific tactical approaches while maintaining its core principles of reasoned analysis, disciplined execution, and service to humanity. This balance between tradition and adaptation represents one of the chapter's greatest strengths, allowing it to maintain cultural continuity while avoiding the dogmatic rigidity that might render it ineffective against evolving threats. The return of Guilliman in the 42nd millennium presented both validation and challenge for the chapter's cultural identity. Many traditions established during the Primarch's absence were revealed to align closely with his original intent, confirming the effectiveness of the chapter's cultural transmission mechanisms. Others, particularly those involving veneration of Guilliman himself as a semi-divine figure, required significant recalibration in light of the Primarch's well-documented rejection of such worship. Chaplain Cassius addressed this tension in a chapter-wide address following Guilliman's return. "We have preserved our Primarch's wisdom as faithfully as transhuman memory and written record allowed. Now we must demonstrate equal faithfulness by embracing his living guidance, even when it challenges traditions we have long cherished. A son honors his father not through blind adherence to past instruction, but through embodying the principles that underlie those teachings." This willingness to reconsider established practices without abandoning core principles exemplifies the Ultramarines' approach to cultural evolution. Rather than perceiving change as threatening, the chapter views reasoned adaptation as fundamental to its identity, a perspective established by Guilliman himself during the Legion's earliest days and reinforced through millennia of practical experience. As the Indomitus Crusade reshapes the Imperium and new threats emerge from the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Ultramarines' cultural foundation provides stability amid unprecedented change. Their balanced philosophical approach, combining pragmatic assessment with unwavering commitment to humanity's defense, equips them to face an uncertain future without abandoning the principles that have defined their chapter since its inception. In this capacity to adapt while maintaining their essential character, the Sons of Guilliman truly embody their Primarch's vision, not merely as warriors, but as guardians of civilization itself in an increasingly hostile galaxy.